Submit to the High Council here on World Class Bullshitters. I'm your host, Jeff Hicks, and tonight I am joined by the man who has literally written the book on Star Wars, famed Star Wars author, JW Rinzler.
Hello, and thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I mean, you are a highly requested guest over the last couple of weeks. I guess snippets and small, that's what a snippet is, but small pieces of interviews that you've done had been quoted. They've been coming out on other Star Wars related websites. And listeners, Ichibaka and Data Racer 117 is like, Jeff, you got to get him on. So we found the email address. We reached out to you, and now we're here. So thank you for joining us. It's been an exciting week because since you agreed to it, every day I've been thinking about this. So
well, I thank your listeners then.
They're great people. Like I was saying off air, we have a great community here. Couldn't do anything without them. So,
yeah, it's interesting. You know, I really wasn't aware of all the things that are going on the internet. I usually go on social media once a month, but since I'm hyping all up this novel, which we'll talk about later, I've been going on social media more, and so learning about what's happening. And
it's the Wild West in many ways. There's a lot of stuff like Twitter. We joke and say it's a cesspool, but there are some nasty things on Twitter, but then there's also some good things. So I mean, you'll find out. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I guess I've already got some stuff already. Yeah, you have to sometimes take a deep breath.
I mean, you don't need this advice from me, but one thing I tell everyone is just if people say terrible things to you, just let it roll off your back and don't even treat it like it's a thing. So.
Yeah. Well, so far I've avoided that. So, but yeah, when and if it happens, yeah, sounds good.
My advice is always start fights.
Well, tonight Jesse says in the background, start fights before people started with you. So, I'll let other people finish them. Okay. Now, folks, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up before we start tonight. And we also have a series of questions I want to ask Mr. Rinzler. So we're going to start out with a little of his pre-Star Wars career. Then we're going to build up to his time at Lucasfilm. You guys can ask your questions at the end of the show. This will be a nice little replacement for the High Council. So going back to the beginning, what was your first published piece of work?
First published, I guess, probably when I was at GamePro magazine. I was the managing editor, so that was before Lucasfilm. So I wrote a review. I wrote a review of an X-Files game. That's what it was. And I met Gillian Anderson at the big E3 thing in Atlanta. And I wrote about an X-Files game, which actually was really fun. I had to play the whole game, and it was interesting.
I didn't realize you worked for GamePro. I used to read that when everyone still read gaming magazines.
Yeah. When I started, they had a monthly circulation of 500,000 copies, so it was a big deal. And then the internet came along and just killed it.
Yeah, it was a good magazine too. I actually switched over from Nintendo Power because Nintendo was just too kiddie at one point in time. But yeah, E3 in Atlanta, that's what, 95, 90, yeah, 95, 6.
Well, it probably was, but I first went in 98. I started in 98.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they had a great staff, and I'm indebted to Wes Nihei and Francis Mao and Kathy Skaggs were basically the three people, as far as I know, who decided to hire me. And that was kind of the beginning of my, I guess, my publishing career. Before that, I was living in France, so I wasn't doing any of that kind of stuff there. I was teaching.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How long were you a teacher for?
About 8-9 years.
You ever miss it?
I do it now. I do it at the Mendocino Junior College. I teach intro to cinema. Yeah, it's great. I love teaching. You go in there and you have a captive audience, and you get to blab about whatever it is you want to blab about. Of course, you're supposed to be teaching something. But
So after GamePro, how long did it take you to get to Lucasfilm? I mean, what were some other notable works you had between GamePro and some Star Wars work? Because you started there, I believe it was pre-Attack of the Clones, but it was right as the film was still in production, correct?
Right. Well, I was at GamePro they made the switch in 2001, and there was just in those days you could go on the Lucasfilm site and they just listed whatever jobs they had. You didn't have to search for them. They didn't play any games with you. It was just like, here are the jobs we have. And I applied for 3 or 4 or 5 jobs before I was able, and I had 2 interviews at different. I had one at LucasArts and one at the short-lived StarWarsKids.com. Wasn't hired, and then they had a job for editor in the publishing department, and I met with a bunch of people. But Lucy Wilson was the head of the publishing department then, and she is really great and was the first employee at Lucasfilm. She'd been there since 1974. And so she had typed up all of George's original scripts for Star Wars. She joined the company 3 years before Star Wars came out. And so she had seen a lot of stuff. And anyway, so she was the one who hired me. And that's how I got over to Lucasfilm. And I just wanted to work there. I was never a gamer. And so I didn't want to stay at the video game magazine. I wanted to work with somebody who I thought was really creative, and that was George Lucas. And I also wanted to have something to do with ILM because I thought they were an amazing visual effects facility. I was just blown away by the kind of stuff they'd been doing and were still doing at that time, and are still doing.
Now, did you get to hang out with any of the guys that had worked on the old Star Wars trilogy? Like, have you met any of those guys?
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I joined, Lauren Peterson was still there. Dennis Murin is still there, but, I worked with Dennis Murin on a project. Craig Barron, who was in the map painting department, starting with Empire Strikes Back. Ben Burt, got to know him a little bit and worked we did a book together. It was really his book, The Sounds of Star Wars. And I could go on and on. All those guys were either around or still in the business. I mean, Ken Ralston, talked to him on the telephone, the actors, etc. And I mean, I could go on and on and on. It was just a real privilege to meet many of the people who had worked on the original trilogy.
He was a name I was going to ask you about, Ken Ralston, because he's on all the special features. He seems like the nicest, friendliest, funniest guy. And his name he always stuck with me because he always had a million things to talk about. So, yeah,
Ken. I've talked to Ken a couple times on the phone. I've never actually met him in the flesh, but after one call, like a week or 2 later, he sent me a drawing that he'd done. I practically fainted when I opened it up. It was such a nice thing to do. And I still have to go get it framed. But anyway, yeah, he's a really nice guy and such a great visual effects artist. I mean, really one of the great of all time, responsible for a lot of that asteroid sequence in Empire Strikes Back and other things. I mean, he really is an artist.
Now, what was your experience with Star Wars? When we had Russell on, he talked about it being this big experience for him as a viewer. Was your first experience with the film? Did it hit that note like a hit for a lot of people, or was it just a movie you enjoyed and didn't expect to be a part of its history moving on?
Well, I think for some people it was a 10. For me, it was probably a 9. So it definitely was an experience. But I was a little bit older. I would say 14 when I saw it. So I wasn't in that incredible sweet spot of 8 or 9 or something.
Oh, okay.
So I was a little bit older, but I did, I went out and got the Super 8 film, and I was trying to put sound to it. And I'd never done that before for any movie that ever came out. And no, it was super exciting. And we saw it at a preview at the Coronet in San Francisco. And so, we didn't want to go, my brother and I, because we were told it was science fiction. And science fiction back then meant it's basically the same deal as boring. The last sci-fi film I'd seen before that was the Russian film Solaris. And that's a hard film to get through if you're 13 years old.
Never seen it.
Yeah, they did a remake. Steven Soderbergh did a remake, which I didn't see. But it was a pretty long and complicated film and pretty dull. I'm sure it's a great film, but for me, I was too young to see it. So anyway, we went to this preview and we didn't want to go, but we were kind of dragged in San Francisco. My brother remembers George Lucas standing up and people applauding. I don't remember that, but what the heck? Let's say he was there. And but when it started, and as everybody says, that ship. I mean, the crawl, and then the music, and then the ship, the little ship, and then followed by the Star Destroyer. It was just, it blew the audience's mind. Everybody just started applauding, applauding crazy. And then I don't know if it happened in ours, but I was talking with Brad Bird, who wrote the foreword to Return of the Jedi book, and he was saying when he first saw it, I think it was in Oregon, people hissed when Darth Vader came on screen. And so there was this kind of latent joy that people and people knew how to react. George was like pushing old buttons that had lain dormant in the audience for a long time, and he reactivated all of that. So you have to remember too that movies were not that much fun in the early 70s, except for like American Graffiti, which actually had probably a bigger effect on movies than Star Wars, or as big in effect, because it was so huge in terms of its comedy and the music and the cruising and everything. It was that movie was a huge deal, and but most movies, you know, were like had everybody was killed at the end. In the 70s, or they're really downers. You know, it was post Watergate, and there were a lot of good movies, but they were really adult movies. You know, now movies are mostly made for kids. Back then, movies were mostly made for adults. And then Star Wars came out and just changed everything. The one exception, of course, was Jaws, which was huge.
I'm sorry, and what?
And The Omen.
Ah, that's a good movie.
Yeah.
Here on the channel, Richard Donner is our patron saint director. We love almost everything he's done. So,
yeah,
big Richard Donner fans.
Yeah.
Now, when you brought up the spectacle of the Star Destroyer coming over the screen, or, you know, coming into frame, you know, spectacle in Star Wars, you talked about how films were different. They were for adults. They were kind of boring, a little dour at the end. And then that comes out. Do you think today that audiences are too spoiled with the spectacle? I mean, you have even a low-key Marvel movie has big effects in it. Do you think that to get Star Wars back on track, you need to either tap into what emotionally works, or do you think they need to go for bigger spectacle?
Well, it all comes down to storytelling, no matter where you are, what's going on. You have to, if you really want to hook an audience, you have to tell your story well. And there's always been problems with storytelling. You know, you always have both good and bad, or you know, average storytellers throughout the history of cinema. But I think because you couldn't rely on digital effects, people did spend more time trying to get the story to work, you know, up until this recent era where I think a lot of times they just really count on the effects to you know, win over the audience, and you can, because you can do such amazing things now. But and they're making, you know, they're still making a lot of money, so they're doing something right. But I find that today the stories are fairly weak a lot of the time, not all the time, but they don't seem to be working as hard on the story.
Now, as a writer, have you noticed, well, just as a film goer, have you noticed the rehash of certain stories? I mean, a lot of people would argue the new Star Wars from Disney, the first film, Episode 7, has a lot of similarities to Episode 4, you know, Death Star style thing. Obi-Wan Kenobi has been replaced by Han Solo as the old mentor character that bites the bullet. Do you think that is a problem in general with film, you know, this rehashing, or do you think it's more exclusive to genre films where there's so much money invested in the film that they have to go with what they think works for safety reasons?
Well, I think people who make big budget movies have to be terrified. I mean, can you imagine you're spending $250, $300 million on your movie, probably something close to that on marketing, and everybody's careers are riding on the film. I don't begrudge people who just trying whatever they can to make their money back. You know, it'd be a very scary place to be, and I've never been in that place, so I don't want to second guess them. But I do think that you see it a lot in comedy. Just because you reference something else doesn't make it funny or doesn't make it interesting. You know, it has to be inherently interesting in itself, and it has to be part of the story, or it's just basically you're just wasting your time and the audience's time. And it doesn't matter to me if you're, if I go, oh, that's from another film. Who cares? You should be trying to tell an original story, or at least a good story, in the most original way you can. And it's distracting if you suddenly realize, oh, that's the same as some other movie. It takes you out of the movie that you're watching. At least it does for me.
Look, at this whole channel was built on being that guy in the theater in 2015 going, this is just like the old Star Wars. This is the same shot setup. This is meant, and it hit me, and it never really went away, because for, let's say, a calendar year until Rogue One comes out, I'm the only guy that's going, didn't you see the similarity? Everyone's like, no, it was so great. And then I liked Rogue One, so I kind of mellowed out. But we get to this Last Jedi one, and I feel like a lot of people started to see those similarities, and with a very critical eye, we put Star Wars under that microscope, but rightly so, because it's Star Wars. I mean, you talked briefly off air, we talked about the breadth of Star Wars compared to just like something like Indiana Jones, which is also a big franchise, and we were just talking about the merchandise. Like, Star Wars goes so far, and that name carries so much weight, and a lot of people felt like you could go anywhere, but you basically started at the beginning, and now we don't even know where we're going to go. But I'll get into that stuff a little later. I don't want to bombard you with that. Actually, I have this laid out, folks, chronologically, because Mr. Rinzler has been involved with a lot of cool stuff. Has met George Lucas, worked with him, so we got some really cool stories to talk about tonight. So you did mention how you came to work at Lucasfilm, but when you got there, as somebody who watched Star Wars at roughly 14, it had been a part of your life. You get to work where Star Wars was created. What was your first day like? Were you nervous? Just stuff like that.
I think the first 2 or 3 months, I'd wake up at 2 or 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, because we were thrown into the deep end there. There was very little training. And episode 2 was already, we were working on the visual effects, and I was in charge of, as it turned out, all the nonfiction stuff, which meant behind the scenes books and the episode 2 and for episode 2 and 3 that was already ramping up. And so I had to meet and basically work with Rick McCallum, and everybody was terrified of Rick McCallum because he had quite a reputation. But that actually went really well, but it was all nerve-wracking and really fun at the same time. And the first day I had lunch there. So I was working you have to remember the Lucasfilm was spread out in various places back then. Publishing was part of Lucas Licensing, and Lucas Licensing was in Skywalker Ranch. And Skywalker Ranch had several buildings. It still does. It's the main house, and then it has a carriage house, and it has the stable house, and so on. And Skywalker Sound, which is the tech building. And I was in the carriage house, and there's 4 different places to eat, which was fantastic. It was like there's so many choices, and it was all subsidized, and they grew their own vegetables, and George had his own cattle. I mean, it's an amazing place. And so we were eating in the main house, which is a beautiful little dining room where it maybe fits maybe 40 people or something, and or less. But anyway, about 2 tables over, George Lucas was eating with Carrie Fisher, Rick McCallum, and John Williams. He was probably talking. It was probably around the time they were spotting the music for episode 2, and I just thought, wow, this is intense. So it was really fun and quite nerve-wracking, because then we were working on all these books, and I had more books at one time than I'd ever had before in my life. So it was a steep learning curve.
So now, what was the official first book under the Lucasfilm, the Lucas Books title that you worked on? I know you said you're nonfiction, but like, you remember specifically what was the first one you got back? Like, oh, this is my work. It's in print. It's cool.
Well, my job was to be an editor, not to be a writer. I was not in any way brought on to be a writer. In fact, when I started, I don't think employees were not allowed to write, because there had been some problems, conflict of interest, whatever. And so, but there were just a bunch of episode 2 books. There was the junior novelization. We were starting the Boba Fett series. That was a big deal. There was 6, and it turned out to be 6 Boba Fett books. There was the DK visual dictionary and cross-section book. And then, of course, there was the art of episode 2 and the making of episode 2. So it was a lot of stuff. It was all the whole basic publishing program. I mean, there were three other editors, but I was doing about a quarter of it. There was somebody else was doing the comic books. Somebody else was doing the adult novels. Sue Restoni was doing the adult novels. Chris Rossi at that time was doing the comic books, and Michelle Vukovic was doing the magazine and a lot of other titles. So it was a big push, and so yeah, that's what I was doing.
Now, I wanted to ask you, since on the episode 1 special features disc, George Lucas has been quoted as saying he's gone too far in some places. And I wanted to ask you this now, since we're talking about episode 2. Was there any kind of indication that Lucasfilm was trying to rein in some of the things they did with episode 1 for episode 2? Not necessarily make it a smaller picture, but not... I mean, from a merchandise standpoint, I was 10 years old when episode 1 came out. It was everywhere. You go to Toys R Us, they have giant displays. When you get to 2 and 3, it's much smaller, more reserved. Was there an internal feel like, we're going to pull this one back, or was it just, we're going crazy till episode 3? That kind of stuff didn't affect them.
Well, there's the movie side, and then there's the licensing side. Movie side, George would probably, and I think he said at the time, the second chapter is always sort of the most, the least exciting chapter in a way. It's the bridge film. Of course, a lot of people love Empire, but at the time, even Empire didn't do as well as Star Wars, even though it was critically, I think, did maybe as well, but financially it didn't do as well, although it still did really well. But it was, kind of a downer at the end. Darth Vader is Luke's father, Han Solo's in Carbonite, and episode 2 is kind of the same way. It's the beginning of the Clone Wars, and Anakin starting to his sort of downward spiral, but they at the time they really wanted to sell episode 2 as a romance, and they really wanted to, marketing wise, they really wanted to get women into the theater. That was their main push internally, and then licensing wise, I think on episode 1 the idea that people had kind of got everybody thought, not so much Lucasfilm, but a lot of the licensees went a little bit crazy and thought they were just going to basically be printing money. and even though they made a lot of money, I think some of them made more than even that market could handle. So there was definitely a pulling back for the licensing program. It was smaller, but it was more of a toy thing and other ancillary things. Publishing was pretty much the same as episode 1, if not even a little bit more.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's interesting that you brought up the whole romance to try to bring in women, because with the more modern Star Wars, there's been a push to get young girls into it, the way they've marketed, the merchandise they've produced. And it's funny how, based on a certain point of view, mine, when they try to do that stuff, it doesn't necessarily... I'm not going to say fail outright with episode 2. It kind of is weird, especially some of the Hayden Christensen stuff. When you get to the newer stuff, it doesn't feel as organic. Like, there's other Star Wars stuff that's just natural. And I always brought up the point to the listeners, to fans, to friends. It's like, these movies made hundreds of millions of dollars back in the day. Women had to already be there, type of thing. So I didn't realize that with 2, that was their push for the romance.
Well, the marketing, you're in the marketing department, you have to have some kind of strategy. You got to, you have to have some sort of point of view. So that was their point of view. I don't really remember episode 3 there being except that it was the climax and it was the last Star Wars at that time, the last Star Wars movie. So what I do remember is, any marketing meeting I always thought was kind of hilarious, because a lot of marketing executives would use all these sort of catchphrases that you couldn't just speak in English. So I was always a bit amused by marketing meetings. It felt like I was entering a Twilight Zone or another reality where the usual laws of logic no longer applied. Obviously, I'm not applying for work at any marketing department. But the real marketing people, of course, are geniuses. People like Charlie Lippincott and Sid Ganis before at Lucasfilm, or not before Charlie, but before my time, but after Charlie at Lucasfilm, who later went on to run a studio. I have huge respect for the people who market films effectively if you sometimes they really hit a home run, but many times you kind of laugh at marketing things. That's the danger of the occupation.
Now, while we're on the topic of episode 2, I wanted to ask, since episode 2 was the first Star Wars film not to be the #1 film in the year that it was released, after episode 2 had come out and run its course, was there any, even on the marketing side or any part, was there any like concern? Did people know? I mean, that was when, not right now, excuse me, back then you had Lord of the Rings, you had Spider-Man, you had Harry Potter, you had these other big mega franchises kind of vying for what had traditionally been Star Wars territory. I mean, was episode 1, those franchises either didn't exist or weren't on film yet. But you get to 2 and it shows, and they never really had seen that. Was there any kind of like response internally?
There must have been. I was not privy to it. I didn't. There was definitely no, among the rank and file. There certainly was no sense of panic or anything. Things were moving so fast that, before episode 2 was even out, we were already working on episode 3. So, including George. So, I don't think there was any. And the licensing was doing really well. It was a smaller program, but it did really well. And the licensing department at Lucasfilm at that time, and what it became basically from, I joined, other people joined. There were people that had been there for a while. It was a very good overall team up until the time that George sold it. There were only about 30 of us, and the licensing department, working with licensees, had a very good working relationship with, as far as I know, pretty much all the licensees, and that we were making sometimes more money in a non-movie year than a movie year, which is pretty rare for the movie business. So I don't think there was definitely no sense of panic that I was aware of.
I'm glad you brought up the whole movie year versus non-movie year, because currently, and this isn't really speculation, over the last couple of years, Hasbro has released their numbers for partner brands, which includes Star Wars. And Star Wars, the brand, isn't as strong as it used to be just with the main toy line. I guess really it's not, because they don't make as much anymore Star Wars merchandise. It's, back when you were at Lucasfilm, I could count 12 games within the course of a few years. Now, with the course of like 6 years, there's 3 games. So it's a much smaller pulled back thing. But we see that Star Wars, for the licensors, or licensees, you're the licensor, correct? That was what Lucasfilm was? They're getting, it seems like they're getting less of a return. And I just wonder, from the outside looking in, have you noticed like the glut of Star Wars merchandise that sits on shelves, that Star Wars is now at the dollar store chains? It's no longer, this brand that, was the Cadillac of IPs. It's now everywhere, and it's a lot smaller in terms of like, that prestige it once held.
Yeah, well, I mean, that I think that's bound to happen when you have a movie every year instead of a movie every 3 years. When George was doing it, it was basically, even though it was distributed through Fox, it was very much an independent film company run by a man who had started it and basically did what he wanted to do, and was very good at running his company. Nobody's perfect, but basically he was very good at running this company. And these movies were handcrafted. They were handcrafted movies. It's not like he touched everything, but they were, every scene, every shot went through his filter, and there was a lot of care taken for every scene and for the whole thing, and a lot of care was taken in terms of the licensing program. They made sure that there was, this number of high-end replicas. There was, and this number of coffee table books, and there was, there was Lego Star Wars, but they weren't making a bunch of different team ups, if you will. It was very regimented in a sense, and frugal almost in a way. But it was, they were all the little heads of departments within licensing worked well together. And Howard Rothman was the president of licensing and oversaw it, and he'd been there since 1980, I believe. And so it was just a really good team, and they had a really good sense of the fans, what the fans wanted, and catering to some. I don't know about that, but starting the fan film awards and things like that, and starting the Star Wars celebrations. And there was just it was a very good feeling. And once I got an in-house memo from George, because one kid had written in complaining about a book that we'd done that said you could build. It was a Lego book. There were Lego pieces in a book to build a spaceship, and the way the book said it is that you could build 8 spaceships, but you could build 8 different spaceships at 8 different times. You couldn't build 8 spaceships all at the same time. And the kid was disappointed, and George was basically said, in this thing, fix this. And so, so that's how granular it was sometimes. Not all the time, I'm sure, but if George got a letter from a fan like that, you heard about it. And then, we made sure that from now on, from the reprint for that book, that it explained very clearly that you couldn't build all these ships at the same time. It sounds silly, but it's true. And then I remember, it's not silly, actually. I think it was really important. You have to have an honest relationship with your fans, basically, and your people who are buying your product. I remember Carrie Fisher once had a complaint about she saw a prototype, and there was something she didn't wasn't quite finished, and she called up George, from the floor of the convention thing, and like George was on top of it. The toy department or whatever heard about it the same day. That's how things worked.
It's nice to hear there was such a personal touch, because this is the biggest film franchise ever, but it doesn't seem like what made these people was lost on the fame and the celebrity. Like, it's cool to hear that one letter helped to determine, the changing of the print for a book. But as a fan, I felt that definitely up until the purchase, the acquisition, because I'm 31, so I was a little old for the Clone Wars, but I still watched it in college. It just you would watch that. I would watch that show. I'd get that Star Wars feeling that I think a lot of fans are still chasing, but we're not getting it because in this community we're always trying to figure out what changed. Yes, it was bought by Disney. Yes, they've rehashed things. Yes, but just stories like that, I think, help us as a community figure out what is missing with the Star Wars that we miss. That's no longer there because I don't know. It's so much colder than it used to be. It's nice to hear that there was a warmth, and I mean, Russell was telling us last time when he was on stories about how fun this person is, and that these people still meet up and this like that. It's nice that the making of our favorite stuff has such positivity behind it. You usually hear nightmare stories. Everyone wants to talk about, oh, these people were at odds, or this was the issue, and it's cool to hear that there was a nice balance at some point.
Yeah, I mean, Rick used to call problems, big problems, brain damage, and there certainly was brain damage on all of the films. I mean, it's just the nature of making a big budget movie and a lot of egos and problems. But within Lucasfilm itself, it was very positive. I thought. I mean, there were endless things that the company did for the employees that just made it feel like it felt like a great place to work. So yeah, all of that is true, but you can't recreate it. Some things just exist for a while, and then they're gone. Disney is a different kind of company, and they've had their the original Walt Disney. I mean, imagine what it was like to work at that company. But I can't, in a way, I've read enough books about it. There are parallels between the way Walt Disney ran his company and the way George Lucas ran his company. I think they were both, I would venture to say, utopians. They were trying to make a kind of ideal society within their little sphere of influence to some extent. And it didn't, it never quite works. But it's interesting that they tried. But and then Disney had a kind of second renaissance with the Aladdin, Little Mermaid films, and that series of films, and then you have Pixar, which has had its own sort of, and I guess maybe still is going on at Pixar itself. So you have to sort of look for those things where they're happening, I feel, and it's pretty hard to ask for a company to do something that by its nature it just can't really do right now. But maybe it will. I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
They're knocking it out of the park with the Marvel. Well, they have knocked it out of the park with the Marvel stuff. This whole virus thing slowed stuff down. Plus, I think a lot of people, were off the initial high of the whole Avengers thing. But with the Star Wars movie in this community, it always felt like it started out and then it kind of just went away. I'll ask that at the end because that's actually our final question about, more Star Wars. But speaking of finality, when you were working on Episode 3's books and other material, were there any internal rumblings that like, this is Star Wars, this is it, George has told his whole story, we're done? Or was there always, stuff in the horizon that you guys were going towards?
Well, we definitely thought it, as far as I knew, was the last movie. And then the Clone Wars stuff was starting, if I recall correctly, even before Episode 3 was done. And then I was working, so that was already going, or shortly thereafter. And so there was no idea that Star Wars was coming to an end at all. And it was clear as Clone Wars went on that George was really involved in the storytelling of that series, and that he was working closely with Dave Filoni. And then I was working on this book called Star Wars Frames, which was George's kind of victory lap after completing all 6 films, where he went through and chose his favorite frames from the film. And that was a 5-year project that was very difficult and also a lot of fun. But we were meeting on the 3rd story, the attic of the main house, and I would see all the concept art and some of the concept models for the what was going to be the TV show, which never got made. But clearly, that was going to be a very ambitious undertaking. So it was clear that Star Wars was going on at all the time. And then there was also Star Wars Detours, which never saw the light of day, but several episodes were completed.
I've seen a couple of the clips online pop up with that one. It was an interesting time too, because George really opened up a lot of like parody. You had Family Guy, Star Wars, you had Robot Chicken. I think he's actually a part of the Robot Chicken one himself. So he definitely had a good sense of humor about that. It was so weird that the one humorous show, it was just like, it was so bizarre. I've read some of the stuff online. It was so kind of out there, but I mean, we've seen weirder stuff, so who knows? I mean, I'm glad stuff worked out the way it did, though.
Yeah, I don't know why they didn't decide. I don't know why that they decided not to release it. I was not privy to that conversation. I do remember meeting Seth Green once in the cafeteria, though, in San Francisco. That was fun.
Now, would a lot of celebrities just kind of pop up at Lucasfilm and get the grand tour and stuff like that?
There were people all the time, and I didn't see half of them. Sometimes it depends where you were. At Skywalker Ranch, you'd see people who were working on post-production of their films. So one time I was eating at the fitness center where they had a grill, and Clint Eastwood was at a table opposite me. So that was fun.
Cool.
Seeing one of my, a legend in the flesh. And then, you'd see, I saw Frank Oz a few times. And then at Lucas, when we were all in San Francisco at the Presidio, people were coming through almost weekly to do Q&As basically for ILM, because they were on some kind of, it was like a circuit that people would go on, a high-end circuit to promote their films to film people. So I saw dozens of just, from James Cameron to it's funny, now I'm blanking all of a sudden. Quentin Tarantino, all sorts of people were coming through to promote whatever film they were doing. So that was just, and you could just go for lunch. You would just show up. There was no line. It was free. You just go in and sit down. George Miller, after doing Mad Max Fury Road, it's fantastic.
Oh, cool. Now, did you have an opportunity to strike up any conversations with anybody, or just now?
When Aaron Sorkin came, because at that time, now I was sort of considered a writer, they invited me to the lunch afterwards with him, but I didn't get a chance to really talk with him. But you could raise your hand. But there was always a lunch, but that was more of the ILM folks that would go, the ILM soups, basically, or the president of ILM, or whoever was around. But I was licensing, so I wasn't really invited to those.
Now, I do have a weird question. So when we had Russell on, he told us that he was told to never directly approach George Lucas. Have you ever heard anything like that? Was that ever, since you were a writer working on things that he would be more in line with?
Well, when I first started, I heard about it, but nobody from Human Resources actually told me. In fact, it was the opposite. It was very casual. I went in with a suit and tie and a jacket, and they told me because first you go to HR, they said, please lose the jacket. This is not that kind of place. It was the tail end of the 1960s movement. George was at USC in the 1960s, and there was still an element of that kind of, counterculture maverick mentality at Lucasfilm. Particularly the first few years. But then, when I first actually started going to meetings with George, I just kept my distance. And I actually heard from a number of people that he was shy, basically. And so I just kept my distance. And I kept my distance probably for a year. And I went to, dozens of meetings with him because I was chronicling the making of episode 3, all these art department meetings. And he was also starting a book line called George Lucas Books, and I was working on that with Lucy. So we were in a number of meetings with him about that. I guess I would talk to him in those meetings, but not sort of a casual conversation. And that didn't happen until I was on the set of episode 3. And then we started having, just sort of casual, because there was a lot of downtime and dead time. So it wasn't like we were talking every day, but, every so often, you talk for 15, 20 minutes between shots. And, as he got more comfortable with somebody, then he would, occasionally strike up a conversation. But he was busy, so you never wanted to go up there and say, hey, George, because if you were distracting him, that was not good. He had a job to do.
Well, it's cool to hear the opposite side of that, because I was always like, oh, when Russell, he told me that story in person and then, on air, and I was always like, oh, that's kind of a bummer, but I get it. But then,
well, you have to imagine if everybody had an opinion on Star Wars, everybody had questions on Star Wars. If George was stopped in the hallway, on his way to a meeting, he would never get there. He would literally never get there. He would never get to any of his appointments. Because if the idea was if they encouraged people to go up and ask him questions, and it would have driven him crazy. And even actors experienced his sort of lack of availability on the set. Even earlier, Anthony Daniels, I think it might have been the Jedi book or the Empire, where Anthony Daniels said, he couldn't answer all the actors' questions because he just couldn't. He just had to clone himself. There just wasn't enough time in the day to talk to everybody. It's hard to imagine what it's like to be a director on a film set or a person running a company. They just don't have time for that stuff.
So now you get to go on set for Star Wars Episode 3. At the time, everyone thought this was the final Star Wars chapter, film cinematically. Do you have any good memories of being on set? Anything cool? Anything that was it the first film set that you've ever been on? And secondly, what was this one like for you?
It was basically the first set I'd been on. I'd walked around Universal Studios when I was a kid. It's a long story, but I was sort of walked on the set of a couple places, but I wasn't really on the set. I just sort of was there for a few minutes and left. So yeah, it was basically my first time on a set, and it's a very intense place to be, and there's lots of stories. There's just so many cool moments. One time, I don't know why, I had to go onto the set for something. Actually, onto the set. Usually, you're off the set in what was called the Video Village. Mm-hmm. And where the big screens are, could see what they were shooting. But I had to go on the set for something, and I'm going up this very narrow staircase, and Ian McDermott was going down the steps in his full emperor makeup and going up the steps. It's like, excuse me, emperor, I got to get over there. I remember sitting with Anthony Daniels. I was interviewing him for the book, and we were outside just on a bench, and he just started doing the whole C-3PO voice, quoting the original lines from the opening of Star Wars. It was nice of him to do. And then another time, I got there. Rick told me to come early. It was on a Saturday, and I didn't know what the reason was. So I got there, and he and George drove up in a kind of golf cart, and I got on the back. And Jet Lucas, I think, was there also. Or maybe not. Maybe it was just me, George, and Rick. And we drove to this empty sound stage where Nick Gillard was there with Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen rehearsing the lightsaber battle at the end, and they were already so good at it. And they're using a handle with basically like a stick on it, and they're just rehearsing the stuff, and it's as fast as in the movie. They didn't speed it up or anything. Those guys were so good at this lightsaber fight, and that just blew my mind. And then I could go on and on and on. There were lots and lots of things that were wonderful.
Now, do you have a personal favorite lightsaber duel of all the Star Wars films?
I don't know. Probably, I guess, the one in Empire. I guess that would be my favorite. Yeah, that was
Same here.
Pretty good. Pretty good.
Now, so Star Wars had completed, and now we're onto these. Well, in the process of doing these making of books. I think one of the first ones I ever came into contact with, was the making of Star Wars, the very first film. So what was, of the trilogy ones, the original trilogy books making of, what was a favorite of yours to work on? Or which was your favorite,
Yeah, occasionally people ask me this. I say it's like choosing between children. You can't. Each one is special in its own way, and each one had its own problems and challenges. But what happened was, George liked the Episode 3 book, so when I pitched doing a book on the original Star Wars, first Star Wars film, he okayed it. And at that time, I just thought, I'll do my best, and I'll find a lot of articles, and I'll talk to people. But then I heard that there were these old interviews somewhere in the archives, and I asked the librarian, because Skywalker Ranch also has its own library. It's very cool. And Joe Donaldson was the librarian basically the whole time I was there. And she was fantastic. And I asked her about these interviews, if she knew anything about them. She said, "Oh yeah, I think I know where they are." And he looked them up on the computer. And I don't know if it was the next day or the next week. They said, "Okay, we have them." So I just came over, and there was this box of interviews from 1975, 76, 77, 78. And I just thought, with Harrison Ford, John Williams, many with George, several with Gary Kurtz, John Williams, Gary Fitt. I thought, this is going to be a good book. Charlie Lippincott had done all of that work, but he'd never been able to write the book. And so I was able basically to use these old interviews, which had never been read, I think, after they were put in a book. Maybe one person had read them. They were just in the box and left there.
Now, do they digitize a lot of their archives, or do they just keep the physical?
None of it was digitized. So that was always sort of the uphill battle, was getting some of these things were written longhand. So, and they were the original tapes, were just these cassette tapes that were also just on a shelf. And I think it took us a while we figured out, those things are these things. And so luckily Lucasfilm paid to have the tapes transcribed. And so then but even back, and then it wasn't even digitized. They were just hard copies. But over the course of the years, we got better at digitizing stuff. But basically, for all those original trilogy books, I was just going into boxes where it was analog. Everything was analog. There was stuff just thrown into boxes, and I'd have to figure out how to get it into a form so I could use it in the book.
So on that first, on the Episode 4 book, what was something that you learned from these interviews that you're like, wow, as a Star Wars fan, you're kind of blown away by, or just, I know the novelty of like only a few sets of eyes had ever seen these things. Or was there anything that you had learned that has like stuck with you from those specific interviews that you read?
All kinds of things. But one of the things that really blew my mind was how much Fox had dug in its heels. Particularly, it was the business division of Fox that was digging in its heels. Remember, George didn't have any money to pay for the first one. He had some money from American Graffiti, but not movie-making money. And so, and Star Wars was an expensive movie. So they were digging in their heels because nobody understood the script. Only Alan Ladd at Fox had faith in him, and Alan Ladd basically had faith in him because of American Graffiti and because of his character. There was some sort of meeting of the minds between Alan Ladd Jr. and George, but the business division didn't allow any money to be spent on Star Wars. They did not. They dug in their heels, and there would literally be no Star Wars if George hadn't financed pre-production with his American Graffiti money. He had enough money to do that. He had enough money to pay Ralph McQuarrie and get ILM going and pay Colin Cantwell out of his own pocket. And I remember George was really, sometimes it's hard to tell if George is pleased about something, but you kind of figure it out in retrospect. And he was pleased because when we spoke a few times. After one of the conversations, he said, you should talk to Richard Tong, who was George's accountant back then. And Richard Tong, he has since passed away, sadly. He contacted George, gave me, his executive assistant, Jane Bay, gave me his number. I called him. He came into my office, and he had the receipts, the exact amount of money George had spent on pre-production, and it's in the book. It was around, I'm probably gonna get wrong, but I think it was over $400,000, and that's 1975, 76 money. So I mean, that's how much he believed in his project, which nobody except for him for the longest time believed in.
So since you're talking about, his, conviction to Star Wars, and you've seen access to stuff, I have a question for you, since not a lot of people can answer this. Based on the stuff that you've seen, behind the scenes material, there's always been this confusion of how much was actually planned out, how much was written out. He talks in the Empire of Dreams documentary how he had one movie, he broke it down into 3 parts. That's what the original trilogy was. And then we've heard other interviews where, stuff from the prequels had been written before and all this stuff. When you were working on the making of Star Wars: A New Hope, was there any indication how much he had planned out, since, you've seen this stuff? How much did you take away what was written down that would turn into the entire saga?
Well, there were bits and pieces here and there. I think I even wrote an article, I think I have it somewhere, about stuff that he wrote for the original trilogy here and there, and that wasn't used, and eventually was used in the prequel trilogy. But how much of it was planned out chapter by chapter? I think George had an idea, but it was very malleable. Once he actually got to making the film, it became something much more complex than what, he maybe had a few ideas, but it wasn't all spelled out. He doesn't like to work that way, for the same reason he doesn't really like storyboards that much. I mean, he used storyboards because he had to, but he didn't like it because he felt that often it would put the director into a corner where you couldn't, people said, no, this is the shot, this is the storyboard, that's what we're doing. So he didn't like it. That was, the whole reason why he was championing digital cinema, is it gave him more flexibility and gave the movie maker more flexibility to do their movie. You don't have to have a locked off shot for the visual effect. It was all about freedom. That's what he was after. So I don't think he was locked into any story until he was actually making the movie.
Well, I only asked that because you were talking about old interviews. Recently, we've gone through some of the special features on the Star Wars discs, and there's an interview from, I guess it has to be mid-1977, where interviewers would ask Carrie Fisher, who is Princess Leia going to end up with, Han Solo or Luke Skywalker? And she's quoted as saying, if she ends up with Han Solo, she's a schmuck. So there was always this love triangle idea up through The Empire Strikes Back. And then everyone goes, well, he had always planned for them to be brother and sister. And I always call BS on that, because you wouldn't build up love triangle in the media and in the film and all this stuff. And then at the third chapter, you just go, oh, they were always related.
Yeah, no, I mean, you have to, in some ways, it's true that I don't think it was planned, but at the same time, George could say that it was planned because there was something similar. For instance, and I've talked about this before, so I hope I'm not boring people, but the Darth Vader being Luke's father, I don't personally, this is just personally, I don't feel like Darth Vader was Luke's father in A New Hope. But, and then he turns out to be his father in Empire. But in the original rough draft, Anakin Starkiller's dad was Kane Starkiller, who was half man, half machine. So, I mean, it was his father. And in an early draft, a character named Leia, I don't think she's a princess, but Leia is a cousin of Luke Skywalker. So there is a family relationship. In an early draft, I think it's the second draft of Star Wars. So there was the idea, but then it doesn't really crystallize, or George comes back to it in Jedi. And George, I said in Jedi, that in Return of the Jedi, the book, the making of, that I think I found the exact part where George, it crystallized for him, and he wrote "sister!" and it's in the book. And the caption says, this is where George crystallized the idea. George didn't cut out the caption, he was fine with it. So I think it was there as an idea, but wasn't crystallized. He was actually doing the movie. And I do think there was a triangle in Empire. So it's it's kind of unique in the history of movies. You had a very idiosyncratic genius making his very personal movies that were at the same time huge blockbuster movies, and I don't know that there's an equivalent in the history of whatever movie making. Maybe Charlie Chaplin comes sort of close, but he wasn't making Star Wars type movies.
Now you brought up these drafts of Star Wars. Now you're credited as writing the Star Wars comic, the comic book adaptation of the earlier drafts of the Star Wars script. What was that project like for you?
That was a very fun project. I'd drawn comic books as a kid. I was like a typical nerd sitting in my room drawing comic books that were pretty lousy. But I loved doing them. I spent a long time doing them. And then when I was reading the rough draft, I got the idea that it would make a really good comic book. I thought it'd be a good idea. And I asked George about it at some point, and he just said no. And but then I heard that Randy Stradley over at Dark Horse had the same idea independently of me. So I basically called him up and said, I have an idea. If we want to sell George on this idea, we have to get somebody and do a few pages. I'll write out the script, but in those pages, there can't be any word balloons. It all has to be purely visual storytelling, because that's what George likes, which I learned over the years. And so Dark Horse hired Scott Collins, and I wrote up whatever it was, 10 pages or something, and he did beautiful comic book version of those pages. And I sent him over to George, and George at that point said yes and got very excited. He wanted to see the concept art. He wanted to be involved. But then about 3 or 4 months after that, he sold the company. So when I went to him with the first concepts, he said, I'm not interested anymore. Just show him to Kathleen Kennedy. And from that point on, he wasn't involved. But we went ahead and did the 8-issue series, and it was Mike Mayhew did a fantastic job, and Randy Strandley was a great editor. And it was just really fun. And some people pointed out the story doesn't really work and is really stupid in parts, but that was the whole point. That was the book. It was supposed to show how it didn't work. We did our best job to sort of make it work, but still it wasn't supposed to be perfect.
Well, it's one of the beauties of Star Wars is how much the making of it's been embraced by the people. Some movies, oh, this is the documentary and we never touch it again, but there's always new making of Star Wars information, and it never gets old. I mean, I'll have a question for you that I didn't even email you. Have you ever had access or the opportunity to watch the other cuts of A New Hope or just Star Wars, like in the archives? There's a black and white cut. There's a couple different edits out there. I just wondered if you ever had access to those.
Yeah, no, I saw, because we did enhanced e-book versions of all three of the making of books. Have you seen those?
I have not. I have a physical copy of the first Star Wars book and then the Indiana Jones book.
Yeah, so and I don't know if they still are. I think they still are. They're very cheap right now. You can get all three of them for $25 or something. And I spent hours going through with the film archivist looking for stuff video and audio stuff we could put for these basically enhanced ebooks. And so I watched hours of dailies and things like that. And there is some confusion out there that there was a cut that was like almost done and that was, that the English editor did, and that's not accurate. The English editor was fired from Star Wars, and they took apart what he'd edited, and they started from scratch. But it was confusing because they were still those reels were put in the same metal cases as the English cut, so it looked like that was the English cut.
Oh, okay.
And I pieced that together with the film archivist, and then there was actually the first cut that George and his editors worked on. So yeah, and it has those scenes that took place in Tatooine and things like that. And so anyway, yes. So the short answer is yes. I've seen a lot of that stuff.
We joke here on the channel about like what's an alternate cut of a film you'd love to see outside of the Eric Stoltz Back to the Future. I always go the alternate takes of Star Wars because, I mean, we've gotten a lot of those over the years. The CD, was it the Magic of Movie or something like that? But it would just be so cool to see whatever cut that, like, I think it was Francis Ford Coppola, Brian De Palma, and Spielberg watched at Lucas's house. There's like a famous story or something, right. And they hated it, and I think Spielberg just liked it himself, and that was about it.
That cut is pretty close to what was released. But when they were watching it, though, most of the visual effects weren't finished. So the real big difference between the final film and what they saw was that you had a lot of stuff written in with grease markers saying, laser blast going this way, and shot missing here and stuff like that.
Okay.
It wasn't that dramatically different, that from what I mean. There were a few scenes that were cut, and they hadn't added the whole. I don't think they. Well, I don't know. You'd have to read. I don't remember. But the book for you, you'd probably like the enhanced ebook versions of these things. I found a few shots and scenes that were not on any of the DVDs or Blu-rays that are on these enhanced ebooks.
Well, I have your Amazon bibliography pulled up, and yeah, folks, right now you can get The Making of Star Wars Enhanced for $12.99. Empire's only $5.99, and Return of the Jedi's $8.99. I'm going to pick those up after we go off air because I'm weird about buying stuff on air. Who knows who could see anything? But I do want to get these because, like I said, I moved across the country. I don't have any of my books with me outside of some EC comic books. So
yeah, there's about an hour. I think there's 30 minutes of video and 30 minutes of audio for each film, and there's also 300 more photos than in the actual books because there was no limit basically on how much we could stick in there.
Now, are you pretty much? Do you have carte blanche when it's like, I like this stuff, like photos and stuff like that? Or do you have an editor that has an approval over you? Or since you've been there so long, you kind of have a good amount of say in your work?
When I was at Lucasfilm?
Yeah.
I mean, I was working with a publisher, but for those books, and I was working with an art editor or art director, and he certainly would give me his advice, but I had final say. So yeah, it was an ideal position to be in. I was the writer and I had final say. But there's only so much you can fit in. But we did a pretty good job of getting everything in there. And I had a couple great designers too. on those books. So, it was a team effort, but I was in the driver's seat, and it was a fun place to be.
So you were at Lucasfilm from early 01 till when?
Till, I think, basically January 1st, 2016.
Okay. So now, when did you first hear that Lucas was going to sell to Disney?
I don't remember the day, although I started writing a blog about it. I have the day is in there, but then of course I had to take the blog down, which is another story, but which I've told other places. But whenever it was, I found out like everybody else, there was just a email from whatever. Sometimes they send out mass emails. So it was from whatever department that was saying, George has sold the company. There's going to be a big company-wide meeting over in Point Richmond. And everybody just started getting in cars and carpooling over there. And it was very exciting and also emotional. It was a total surprise for me. Although I as I've said elsewhere, I thought he would sell the company one day to Disney, but I thought it was maybe 10, 15 years off.
Was there any concern? Did people think like, oh, we work on Star Wars stuff, we're safer? Oh, what's going to happen? Was there a lot of uncertainty?
There was a lot of uncertainty. There was also a lot of excitement. Disney is this huge company. I think people were excited to see what would happen. Also, Kathleen Kennedy was, in charge basically, or George's number 2 at that point, but clearly was being groomed to take over. So people were excited about that. And but there was also fear. I think the main fear was that we were all going to be moved down to LA. Remember, we're in Northern California, so that was the main fear at first.
Now, what was your relationship like with Kathleen Kennedy? When I interviewed Russell said she was at some meeting, she said whatever, and then he never really, I think he left shortly thereafter and never really had any interaction with her. But since you were there till 2016 through the production of The Force Awakens, had you interacted with her prior to, when did you first start interacting with her, and then how did things change once she took over as the president of Lucasfilm?
Well, this is where we get into NDA stuff. So,
of course,
I never personally, we never had any like one-on-one interactions. I was in a few meetings, smaller meetings, and a few, I guess you could say, well, I don't know, key meetings, about Force Awakens, because at first I was going to write. It's a long story, but I was basically working on the making of Force Awakens at first. I was taken off, and then I was put back on. So anyway, I was at some key meetings, but I didn't really have a lot of exposure to her.
Now, there's always been this air of mystery surrounding an upcoming Star Wars film, and it usually is for the fans' benefit with little snippets here and there. But it seems like they kind of took it to the next step with the new, JJ's mystery box, as he likes to call it. Were you guys kept wondering, was there a restriction of information compared to how things were when Lucas was in charge?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was I mean, that I will say, and this is just my opinion, the way it changed, when George was running the company, the people who were working in licensing and other departments, people who needed to know the story, were treated like adults. Well, I think the first day or the second day, I think it was the first day I was at Lucasfilm, and they really didn't know me from Adam, but I was working at Lucasfilm. They'd hired me. So they gave me a VHS copy of the rough cut of episode 2. It was like a little TV, not much bigger than my computer screen right now. And he just stuck it in there, and I watched it. So I knew what the movie was about, and I knew what it looked like. So I could work on the books effectively. And certain licensees, key people were brought in, and they probably didn't see the rough cut, but some of them might have. But others were definitely given a script. Whereas at Disney, basically, you were infantilized. Nobody was trusted, and you were not allowed to see things until it was, far too late in terms of knowing how to, in a sense, maximize what you were doing in relation to this new film. I will say it was not. It was sort of not done in the best way, and it was like, oh, and licensees. I don't know about all of them, but a couple of the licensees that I worked with, I was unhappy because I thought, and again, this is just my opinion, I thought they were being forced to jump through so many hoops that were unnecessary because, just for security reasons. You know, and these are people that we'd worked with literally for over a decade. You know, they could be trusted, and it was damaging to our relationship to make them jump through so many hoops.
So so you said it was damaging. Like, would people talk? I'm not asking you to just tell me specifics, but would people be, I don't want to say offended is the right word, but were they taken aback? Where, you know, we had this relationship for, you know, up to a decade. Was there any kind of that, or did people just kind of blindly accept, well, this is how Disney runs stuff?
I don't really know. I didn't have a lot of conversations with them, but it was clear that it made their jobs much harder to do, and it made the product not as good as it would have been.
I mean, from a fan standpoint, I definitely feel that that's right there. It could have been better. I think you know, internet secrecy is a concern with everything, but from your point of view, it sounds like they've just taken it too far. I mean, I know probably not out there in the stores looking at stuff the way I was, but the build up to that film was John Boyega's the star. He's got the lightsaber on the poster. He's on all the merchandise. He's going to be this. And then you kind of see that it's Rey and whatever. She's not this character of any substance, but like, even as you know, we had this bait and switch, like it was this great mystery for Star Wars to trick the audience. I didn't, you know, it just felt like that was what the attention was placed on that, as opposed to the actual film. You know, oh, instead of having a gotcha moment in the film, it's we gotcha in general type of thing. It was very, I don't call it meta.
I haven't seen the films after Rogue One, and didn't really pay any attention to it.
You are so lucky to never watch The Last Jedi. I'm not trying to, you know, ham it up for the camera. It is the worst Star Wars movie, and then somehow they make a pretty terrible one with the follow-up with the Rise of Skywalker. Like, I know, as a fan, I'm just bothered by it. So I don't have to ask you the last question of, have you seen them? What do you think? I mean, whatever.
No, I haven't seen them, and I could, you know, and when I talk about product too, remember, I'm just talking about up to The Force Awakens. I don't think I worked on much of any, if any, of Rogue One. A little bit of Rogue One product, but not much. I can't really remember. So I'm only talking about the build up to The Force Awakens. They may have changed their MO. I don't know. Maybe now they work with licensees in a more more effective manner. I don't know. I'm just talking about The Force Awakens.
Oh, now it's interesting since you brought that point up. A couple of months ago, Gentle Giant. I don't know if you've ever had any interaction with them with your time at Lucasfilm, but like they had an interview where fans were asking questions. And one of the questions was like, what about these characters? And they list the newer ones. And they go, is there really fan demand for that one? And it kind of mirrored what a lot of people had been feeling, where I don't want to call it, well, let's call it engineering. Like they engineered, like they wanted these characters to be popular. But, you know, it felt like with the original Star Wars, you know, organically, Han, Luke, and Leia were popular. It just, I don't know. The new ones felt like a product, like a character, not a fleshed out real person living in a galaxy far, far away type of thing. Did you ever, you know, obviously just with The Force Awakens, did you ever get a feeling like when you saw it, you're like, this isn't, you know, what I'm used to? Was there any kind of like, you know, you could sense a difference type of thing with the way that the characters were created as opposed to how they were created under George Lucas?
I can only really speak to it under Lucas. And I would see the product come through, but I didn't work with Gentle Giant or Master Replica. I would see these incredible things come through because my office for a couple of years, was in the same basic area as the rest of licensing or product licensing. So there used to be, you know, every day product come through, and we had a product room where they would be cycled through, where they would just keep updating. It was like a Star Wars toy room. I mean, and all the most recent product would be in this room. And you could, you know, because we had people coming to visit pretty much every week, and that was kind of like part of the tour. It's like, look at this. And it was really cool. People would be very impressed. And then we also had the Ultimate Kids room, that was like, it was like a kid's room with like, wasn't all the Star Wars product, but it was like, the bedspread, the computer, the skateboard, the whatever it was, the posters, and that was constantly updated, and that was pretty cool and fun. And so, yeah, I think it was very organic. And I remember we did a book, Darth Vader and Son, and suddenly it was like a #1 New York Times bestseller. And so that grew into, they did some, I don't know how it happened, I don't remember, but it became like a replica of the cartoonist version of Darth Vader and Son. And it was really cool. And it was a lot. It was just really fun the way things would happen. Things would become T-shirts. T-shirts would become product, or replicas. It wasn't all planned out, and certainly there was no bait and switch, the kind that you seem to be describing. There wasn't anything like that where we put I don't think George would have approved of something like that.
Speaking of somebody who's never met him, probably never will, I never got that feeling as a Star Wars fan back then. Just now, I just feel a very antagonistic relationship with what had previously been one of the brightest spots of like pop culture for me. Just, Star Wars, it's fun. Now it's Star Wars, it's 12 different things that's never was Star Wars beforehand. But like you said,
that era is over. I mean, George, that's why I've met people who say Rogue One is their favorite Star Wars movie, and that's fine. I don't want to rain on anybody's parade. Whatever you like, if it makes you happy, so much the better. But George Lucas, to me, was a specific artist making specific films. So to me, it was just, if I were to do it, I would get other artists with very specific points of view to do their take on Star Wars, and I would give them a more or less free hand to do it. If I was like running Disney, and the last time I checked, I'm not. But I would do something like that, because then it would at least approximate the spirit in which the original Star Wars movies were made. Unless you do that, it's unrealistic to expect the movies to be anything like what George did.
I think a lot of people too, maybe time has been a lot kinder to the prequels than what Disney has produced. And I firmly believe, time will continue to be kinder to the Lucas era stuff as they continue to go back. I don't know if you follow the news, but they're doing this Bad Batch show, which is more Clone Wars era stuff, which is just a remnant of what, you were there for. It's like the new stuff doesn't really catch on, so they just kind of brushed aside and instantly jump back to older things that have been tried and true, because, Star Wars, like you said, non-movie. I think 2004, I don't know numbers, but 2004 was a really huge year because you had the DVD set, you had the action figure relaunch, you had tons and tons of stuff come out, and it just felt like Star Wars kind of won that year, a year before Episode 5. And now we're, technically every year is a movie year outside of 2020 for the Disney films, and they never felt like this thing. But
yeah, but it's just, you're probably not going to get that ever again, because it was a moment in time. For 3 years. 3 years was a long time. It was a crazy amount of time to wait between sequels. I'm sure, and even George in the very beginning talked about doing a movie every year, but it was just impossible to do them because they were handcrafted, and they just took a long time and a lot of hard work to hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people hours to make them.
It shows. I mean, even bringing model work into the prequel era stuff, it still looks cool. So
yeah, they didn't want to publicize that at the time, but there are a lot of models in Episode 3, a lot of them. It was really cool.
Those age better than people give them credit for, a lot of the practical stuff. I don't know if you had a chance to watch the 3D re-release of Episode 1 when they did the big thing like 10 years ago. But all the practical stuff definitely looked better than the CGI, which I will say, for as much as I respect George Lucas, I think the you talked about wanting to have creative control over the the digital editing and stuff. We watched Episode 2 the other night, and it's weird how, for a man being on the cutting edge at the time, has almost been, I don't want to say aged out because that's not the right word, but like the product that he wanted to be on the forefront of technology is now incredibly dated, but it's almost kind of sad, if you know what I mean by that. Like, episode 2, full high def, this and that, but we've gone so far from that in such a short period of time. I feel like he's stuck. His films are stuck in a presentation that can't exceed, a certain resolution or a certain presentation.
Well, I guess that could be. I mean, I think with digital, what he wanted to do was he wanted to give the artists, movie makers, more freedom to have a much more flexible palette. And there was part of him, I think, that, I mean, he did sell off the model shop, and that was, I think, too bad. Just personally, I would have preferred that they kept on the model shop. For a while, it was run by other people. I think Weta is now one of the few places, if not the only big place, that does all sorts of things, including intense model work. Because I did a book with John Knoll, who was the visual effects supervisor for all 3 prequel films. And his MO was very clearly, digital effects are great, but you have to use the whole toolbox, always. Because sometimes it makes much more sense to build a set. Sometimes it makes much more sense to build a model. Or sometimes it makes more sense to even do, something else, or some sort of combination. And that's how you keep audiences on their toes and guessing and not really knowing how you did something. Whereas if you're basically just filming actors within a digital animated movie, the brain at a certain point switches off because it just doesn't accept it as real. Not just my opinion.
I have a random question. I saw you adjust your camera. Is that a Big Boss poster behind you?
Well, yeah. In some titles, it's the Big Boss. Yeah, no, this is the Big Boss. Yeah.
Okay.
It was for a time. When I saw it as a kid, it had the wrong title. It was called Fists of Fury. And when I saw it in Chinatown in San Francisco, it was called Fists of Fury. But yeah, it's the Hong Kong version of the Big Boss.
It's a good movie. Have you ever seen or heard about the deleted scene with the, I guess the ice house scene, where I guess he uses the axe and it was deemed too violent and they censored it, and I think they destroyed the actual footage of it. There's like
I think I just read that new biography on Bruce Lee. I don't know if it's mentioning that, but I've never seen it yet. But I'm a huge Bruce Lee fan.
Sam, I picked up a book. I think it was on his philosophies. I haven't cracked it, but my personal favorite is the one where I guess Return of the Dragon, where he fights Chuck Norris in the Coliseum.
Yeah,
such a cool fight.
I haven't seen that in a long time, but that was. I mean, he was a genuine superhero. I mean, he was the real deal in real life. It was just those movies came out early. I was really the right age for those movies, so they were just mind blowing.
What was your? Did you have the opportunity to see the film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Tarantino flick?
Oh yeah, I saw that.
What did you think of Bruce Lee's representation in that film?
It didn't bother me as much as some people because I just thought, well, this is just his take on it. I was happy to see Bruce Lee represented at all, but he came off as a little bit of a braggart, which I don't think was fair to Bruce Lee.
I was just curious because I heard the controversy. I thought it was a hyper-realized version of everything in Hollywood, so it fit in the story and it was fun and it was funny. But it's interesting how that man's legacy will never go away. Every generation finds something interesting about him, his ethics, his techniques, and stuff like that. And then it continues to grow a legend, which is cool because he died in his early or mid 30s, so he didn't have a lot of time. But
yeah, his era of superstardom was only like 3 or 4 years. It was super short. It was less than the Beatles. But he was just. I read. If people haven't read that biography of him, I forget who wrote it, but it was very good. I knew nothing about it. It was all like a page turner. It was so exciting.
I'll have to check it out. My best recollection of his life is that movie Dragon, the Bruce Lee story from the 90s. I used to rent that as a kid because I really liked it, but I mean, how authentic is that to what really happened to him? So
I don't know. I don't know if I saw that one.
It's a product of the 90s. If you want to go back and watch it for the cheesiness of it, cool. If not, it's not, you're not missing out. But I want to ask you 2 specific questions. Obviously, they're a little more I don't know if you can answer them directly, but without specifics, did you ever see like an episode 7 treatment that Lucas had written? Because people talk about that stuff nowadays. He even himself talked about it, the world between wills and the microscopic world and all that stuff.
I don't know if this will violate my NDA or not. I think I'll have to take the fifth on that one.
Fair enough. Like I said, I don't want to put you on the spot or cause you any issues, but I was just curious. Are you allowed to say why you left Lucasfilm?
Yeah, I mean that's personal.
Okay.
I could. I don't want to, but I could go.
Oh, if you don't want to, that's fine. You don't have to at all. I just was curious. I didn't know.
No, I mean I don't want to go on for. I could. Basically, actually, I think I wrote a note here, but I didn't want to say a couple of things because it was nice of you to send me the questions in advance. Basically, when I was executive editor, I had a lot of autonomy. There was a director of publishing, but once she said, it was okay to do a project, and once the licensee, the publisher, signed on, we just did it, and I was in charge. And when it was done, the licensee thought it was done. It was done, and and all the book proposals were pitched directly to us, and we basically had control over what was going on, and we had a lot of autonomy. And like the blueprints book that I wanted to do, nobody was very excited about that project, but once we got a licensee to sign on, we did it, and it was a done deal. But as Disney sort of slowly worked, they had to work, in their defense, they had to work Lucas licensing into their licensing program, and they're a bigger company. We had at the most, all of Lucasfilm, like 2,500 people at the height of a movie. Disney had something like 160,000 people when they bought us. So we were being put into a much bigger machine. And so they had to adapt us to their working methods. But it basically took away basically all of my autonomy, which is one of the things that made the job fun. And then, of course, I was no longer working with George Lucas. I was working with him on a number of projects up until the day he sold the company, and then going on a little bit afterwards until basically he divorced himself completely from the company. So that, of course, was also, was no longer as fun. I wasn't working with anybody like him at Disney. And so it was time to go. And also Disney said I couldn't write again when I was actually at the company. Their policy was that editors couldn't write. Or if you did write, you weren't. Well, I don't know if I can say that part, but their policy was you couldn't write. So 3 big things were kind of taken away. And I'd been there by the time I decided to go, I'd been there for 14 or 15 years. It was time to go. And I don't regret it at all. Since then I've been able to do other books, so it was just the time.
Yeah, I was going to actually bring up some of that because, looking up, I knew your name when people brought some of the stuff that you had been doing up. I hadn't heard all about that, but I didn't realize you worked on making of Planet of the Apes, the making of the Rick Baker ones, the one that blew me away, the special effects. Yeah,
Rick Baker was an amazing guy. It was a 2-volume, gigantic, $250 book. Took a long time, and working with him was fantastic. He's really another genius, and that's fun. So I got to work with a genius, a guy who could, with his hands, just make the most incredible things. From Octoman to Men in Black. It was fantastic.
I think the story goes he sketched up the Predator on a flight after they had a failed design, something like that, with the jowls and all that.
He didn't mention that. I don't know about the Predator. I know he was asked to work on the Predator, and he didn't do it. But maybe he did some stuff that I don't know about. He worked on so many things, and of course, he worked on Star Wars too.
He did.
Yeah, he did when they did the pickups in the cantina. He famously basically volunteered practically himself and his crew, and they made a number of the Cantina monsters. And so
I was not aware of that.
Yeah, and his Frankenstein stuff and his Wolfman. And this is the stuff he does for fun. It's around his studio is just mind blowing. And this stuff also that he doesn't get as much credit for, but just old age stuff is phenomenal. The kind of stuff he did with Adam Sandler and Eddie Murphy and changing people. His work is unbelievable, and I knew very little about it before I signed on. I'd done the Planet of the Apes book, so I knew about John Chambers, and I know a little bit about how they did it as a Planet of the Apes. But Rick gave me like a whole master class on how they do
it. As somebody that appreciates art writing, that would be exciting for me to go into something that's like, oh, I've known of your work, now I get to learn all about it. Now, I'm looking at the page and it talks about you're first credited, and it also mentions people like Peter Jackson, John Landis. Now, are you responsible for any of their contributions, or is that somebody else that takes care of that too? Like specifically John Landis. Like, did you speak to him?
John Landis? Well, he worked with Rick on a number of films, starting with Schlock. They were both like, I forget if they were 22 and 21. They were like, early 20s, working on this 10, 14-day shoot, whatever it was. Zero budget, and they were just, John Landis was the first guy who kind of really, really appreciated, I think, from a director's point of view, what Rick Baker could bring to a movie. And then they did American Werewolf in London, and they did Coming to America. So he was a big part, and they're still friends. So at one point, when the book was about, 85% done, we gave the whole thing to John Landis to look at. And then I spent a very intense afternoon and evening with him as he went over all the things that he thought were wrong or could be better, or he wasn't quite like that. And so it was great. Yes. So yeah, and then I was working with him to where he wanted to make changes, massaging the text and stuff. But so they were his changes, but I was, basically working with him on that aspect of the book. And then when he wrote his foreword, and I think I did an edit on it and sent it back to him, the usual stuff. And incidentally, you asked me about Harrison Ford before we went on the air. That's where I worked with Harrison Ford. I saw him on the set of Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, but I didn't talk to him. But later, he wrote a foreword for a book of the unit photographer, David James's unit photography. And so I was on the phone it was pretty cool, with Harrison Ford talking about his foreword. And he was behind schedule, so he was very funny about it. But I had him on speakerphone, and I'd go to my daughter, "It's Harrison Ford."
That'd be so cool. Yeah. Since you brought up Harrison Ford, naturally, the Indiana Jones, the making of the book that I do own, you initially wanted to do a making of for each film, correct? But the publisher didn't see enough demand for Indiana Jones. So you were basically tasked to put 4 movies into one book with one film technically in production. Any memories from that experience, that book, and how do you feel about that as one of your pieces of work?
I was just really honored to be working on that book, as I was for the Star Wars books. But it was right after I'd done the making of Star Wars. So to be able to work on Indiana Jones, and also it was just so cool to be exposed to the whole Indiana Jones extended universe and doing a number of books. It was a really cool publishing program that we did for that one. But yeah, I would have preferred to there was enough material to do a book for each film. But the publisher, like I said, didn't want to do it, didn't want to do that. They didn't think it was a demand. I think there was demand, but it's just, they didn't want to risk the money. And then, and after that, that was the one book that I could not, no, actually, there were 2 things at Lucasfilm that I could not sell. One was an art of Indiana Jones, because there is a lot of art that has not seen the light of day. And it's just sitting there in the archives. Really cool blueprints and concept art. And I could not fit everything into that book, though I got what I hope is the best stuff, but not the blueprints, because the blueprints were not available at that time. And the other one, I wanted to do a documentary on the first Star Wars, because there's a lot of footage without sound, but that was recorded and they have it on beta tapes, and licensing was ready to do it. They just couldn't find the right opportunity and the right timing to do it. But they were on board to do it, and then George sold the company until the whole thing fell apart.
Could you elaborate a little more on that specific one? So the beta tapes, no sound. Was it going to be more of like just a narrated, this is this type of thing from Star Wars, or what was laid out that you can talk about outside of just the approval?
Well, I don't know. I don't think it matters if I talk about this stuff because it doesn't. But it was just behind the scenes stuff. It wasn't like dailies, although they have dailies too. I think. Don't quote me on that one. But it was behind the scenes stuff, and somehow the sound, it was 16 millimeter stuff, and the sound had been separated, or of course, naturally separated. And it had either disappeared or had yet to be found. Nobody was really sure. But there were the original Charlie Lippincott audio cassettes. And so and then of course everybody was still around, so you could just have narration. You could have done it. It would have been a huge amount of work, but it could have been, you could do the coolest documentary on A New Hope if you had the resources. It would cost a lot of money, but you could probably. I mean, my idea was to just make it as long as was necessary. I figured the audience is here. This is the ultimate. Would be the ultimate documentary. And there've been at least a couple of very good ones, but this would be just have more stuff that hadn't been sort of seen before.
Well, that and the Indiana Jones, I'd about anything that they put out with that. It's weird too. Like we talked briefly, either at the beginning or right off air, about the scripts for the Star Wars TV show and how there's maybe at the time these things were created, there wasn't the right platform, but with streaming, you'd think a lot of your ideas would be like Disney Plus. It's an okay service. We get it for free, but something like that documentary would be huge. I don't care that people want to see Hamilton. If you want to pay for Star Wars merchandise, stuff like that really would have kept people around. And I love hearing stuff like this, but it also makes me sad too, because it's like, we could have had this, but we never will. And like you said, you've left. George Lucas is no longer involved. And it kind of puts a little damper on it.
I think somebody probably will eventually do it.
I hope.
It may be, I don't know when, but I think somebody will eventually do it.
Well, I mean, there's so much out there for the making of that film, and with the demand for Star Wars. I mean, old Star Wars stuff. I mean, Empire Strikes Back was the #1 film in box office 2 weeks ago for the 45th time in its history. So clearly, this stuff, the old Star Wars, the original trilogy stuff, has a demand, has the market forever. I would love, to see that, and hopefully one day we will.
What was #1 at the box office?
Empire Strikes Back 2 weeks ago. It was because of the whole pandemic, they re-released it, and it took the top spot for the 45th time in its history. So
no kidding.
Yeah, I think it was Deadline wrote an article, then Forbes picked it up, and it ran for a while. But it just goes to show you the staying power of these movies.
But they're okay. Yeah. So yeah. Well, it's a pretty good film.
Not my personal favorite of the Star Wars films, but it's a damn good movie. I like the first one the best. So that's why when you tell me about we were going to do this, I'm like, I'd have been the guy on the edge of my couch just watching it quietly. I can't get enough about the making. If you could do a documentary on what they ate for lunch each day, I'd give it a shot and watch it one time. So I just love it.
My favorite is the first one too. Originally, I refer to it as Star Wars. That's what it was called when it came out.
Yeah, it's weird the way we operate on the internet, because if you say Star Wars, most people assume it's the whole franchise. So I usually just say 4 A New Hope, but in my mind, it's just Star Wars Empire Jedi, and then we call it prequels and stuff like that. But
yeah.
So we wanted to talk about your newest project before we get into any of the fan questions and stuff. You have a book titled All Up. It was just released on July 14th, so a week ago, according to Amazon. And I'm going to share the screen right here. Oh, you got a copy of it? We'll let you show it.
I don't know if I have to get it right. Yeah,
there you go.
Oh, now my computer's moving. But anyway, I'm moving it the wrong way. There it is. Anyway, you can. I don't know if you can do a split screen or whatever, but yeah, that's my passion project. It took 7 years of research and writing, and it's basically an epic about the first space age, And it's a page turner. It's a great summer read. If you want something fun to read this summer, and you like exciting stories that are true, it's historical fiction. It's about 90% verifiable, but also delves into things like UFOs and there are maybe a couple not exactly conspiracy, but strange government undertakings that took place during the Cold War. So it's verifiable, and it deals with the creation of rockets and the first steps into our solar system, and basically goes from the V2 in World War II and all the cat and mouse and spying that was going on at that time up till the Apollo 11, and including the Apollo 11 mission to the moon. And I find that most people really know very little about the space race, including myself. Not just the space race, but all that came before it, World War II. What actually happened was so exciting. And sorry, my phone is ringing.
It's all right.
The real life stuff that was going on in Germany and in England and in the United States and in Soviet Union at that time is just mind-boggling. It's the most exciting stuff. It's just the most incredible adventure. And so I decided to put it all together in one book. And it's kind of like the other books. It's the behind the scenes, except in this case, it's a novel because I wanted to get in people's heads, and I wanted to talk about some stuff that you can't actually verify 100%, like, was Werner von Braun at Roswell? Well, some people place him there. So why not? Let's have a scene with him at Roswell, after this saucer crash, which of course, some people are still contesting whether that actually happened. So anyway, it's a fun book. It's just a lot of fun.
Now, how long did it take you to write this book? I know you said it was your, you've been working on it. It's a fun summer read for the listeners, or the audience out there. But from, initial germ of an idea to I send it off to my publisher type of thing, how long have you been working on this project?
Well, the germ of the idea actually took place after the first celebration, or no, the third celebration for episode 3, right? That was number 3. Anyway, in 2005, I went to the museum at Huntsville, Alabama, and was just blown away by the actual Saturn V rocket, which they have there on its side, and all the bookshop and Operation Paperclip that brought people who were more or less Nazis over to the United States to work on the secret rocket program, which wasn't really that secret. Anyway, and but I didn't start writing about it till about 7 years later, and then it really took about 7 years of research, rough drafts, many drafts, reading it aloud, getting readers to comment on it, cutting things out. It was much longer, and now it's the right length. It was just huge, and it wasn't until it was really done that I gave it to my agent, who was able then to pitch it to publishers, and thankfully Permuted Press, which is distributed by Simon & Schuster, picked it up, and now it's out there, and I'm so happy to hear from readers that they are enjoying it. It's extremely gratifying, and I just hope somebody eventually picks it up and makes it into an HBO series or something, because it would be a very cool miniseries.
Well, that seems to be the way a lot of creators are going these days. The streaming services really, they're always looking for stuff. I mean, you can only stream, Friends or Full House so many times before you peter out. So original series are really the future, even though I still prefer the theatrical experience. But I wish you the best of luck with everything. I'm going to pick up a copy because we were actually watching, we watched this BuzzFeed show that talked about, some of them were true crime, some are, historical, whatever. But we were looking at the one about Roswell and the crash and stuff. I love science fiction. You brought up the Twilight Zone. I listen to a Twilight Zone podcast as I'm working on some projects and stuff myself. But what is your creative process like? When you have your idea, do you, take yourself away from the world, put yourself up in like a hotel room or something and just quietly write? Or do you, you stay at home, interact, you work for a couple hours and then move on and do your stuff and go back to it?
Well, it was different. Each project slightly different. When I was at Lucasfilm, my day job was as an editor. So I wrote mornings, nights, and weekends. When I started doing All Up, I started doing research on the bus to and from Lucasfilm in San Francisco. So I had about 2 hours every day to do research. But basically, I just start by doing a huge amount of research. Before I spoke with Ridley Scott for the making of Alien, I did as much research as I humanly could, because I've noted that some people, when they finally get somebody like Ridley Scott in a room, they're asking him the same questions that everybody else has asked him, and then you're wasting everybody's time. So it's all about research. It's research, 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 and I just try and do as much of that and figure out what the story is, and then only then do I start, writing, but then you're still doing research, so it's kind of an interactive thing. But then after going freelance, then I've been able to write, full time. But I can write with, people talking in the room. I can be focused. I don't really go to a hotel room or anything like that.
I was just curious because I know I have a friend who's a comic book artist and writer, and everyone has their own process. So I always find it interesting because some of everyone's favorite projects are created under weird circumstances. So I always like to hear personal stories.
Some people work late at night. I can't work late at night. I work. My best work is definitely in the morning. After around 2 o'clock, my brain turns to mush. But I can do other kinds of stuff. I can still do research or whatever. But I try and do. I think actually I kind of like George Lucas's work ethic. You start at 9 and you just keep working till 5 or 6, and you're just putting in your hours like anybody else doing their job.
Yeah, I hear you. I just one other question I wanted to ask you, since you brought up doing art and stuff like that. Any favorite comic book artists?
Ooh, well, nobody's asked me that for a while. I definitely grew up, in the 70s, so that's my era. I had the really extreme honor of hanging out with Jim Steranko.
Ooh.
After New York Comic Con, and basically we were up till like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. He's probably 20 years, 30 years older than me. Was still going strong. I was falling asleep at the table. I don't even know what we were talking about. Was walking around the Upper East Side, Chelsea. Anyway, so Jim Steranko, really one of my heroes. Love his stuff. Jack Kirby, of course. Neil Adams. Those guys, during the 70s. Barry Smith, right, who did the Conan the Barbarian stuff.
Yeah, Barry Windsor Smith.
Yeah, Barry. When I spoke to him once on the telephone, I was just so excited. All those. Mike Kaluta, The Shadow. I love his stuff. And Will Eisner, of course. Will Eisner, I think, is for me, arguably created the graphic novel, but the Spirit stuff is the most cinematic, most beautiful stuff I've ever seen. I love those artist editions of the Will Eisner Spirit. And I got to interview him for about 2 hours back in and that interview was on my website in like 1999 or 2000. And that was one of the greatest experiences of my life. So yeah, I just love all those guys. I don't know if that's the new guys or gals.
I had the opportunity to work for Neil Adams at a convention once, and it was an experience, put it like that. Him and his wife were very generous. They were very kind. They brought you food. They paid you. Everything was, they were great. But man, you had to hustle his prints, and people. It was an experience. I would gladly, well, not anymore, but I'm glad I did it. Put it like that, because I respect the hell out of his work. Did Steranko tell you the Bob Kane story? I think he punched him out or whatever. That's just like a public story he tells. I was wondering if he had told you that one.
I don't think so. No, I don't recall that one.
The guy that created Batman, kind of a fishy history. Thankfully, his co-creator Bill Finger now gets credit on the work. So, DC did it right. But that's a story for another time. I don't want to, bore you. But I do want to ask you, before we have the listeners chime in, what is some advice you would give to a writer today? We have a lot of people that want to get into creative work, that want to get their stuff out there in front of people. What's something that you could tell them today that they can take with them?
Well, it depends what kind of writing you're doing, whether you want to be a sort of nonfiction or more journalism, or whether you want to be a creative writer. The basic advice I'd give is writing is rewriting. for me anyway, and for a number of people. Don't be afraid, writer's block or anything. Just write whatever, get it out on the page, and then start working on it. Start crafting it, modeling it, cutting it down, adding, and eventually, hopefully, you'll end up with something good. And also, don't let anybody tell you that it's terrible. Ultimately, if it is terrible, it's okay. Just move on to the next thing, you know. Yeah, I would say, you know, just keep plugging away. And also, I'd also say, remember that you're in the entertainment business, basically. No matter what kind of writing you're doing, you have to engage the reader. If the reader is bored, then you're not doing your job. And it doesn't mean you have to be going crazy trying to entertain them, but it has to be entertaining at some level. Even if it's information, it has to be presented in a way that's entertaining, you know, the great way that Walt Disney was able to do that in his, you know, his films where they were showing people how to do stuff, you know, for World War II. It was still entertaining.
I'm sorry, could you say that again? I'm trying to get the light turned on.
Well, if you look at like the famous Victory Through Air Power, it's called something like that Disney did, where he was basically working with this famous pilot and theorist. I think he was Russian, about how important it was, how air power was going to be so important in World War II. It's basically an informative, almost documentary style piece, but it's very entertaining. And so, you know, I just think you want to be you want to keep your readers, you know, entertained while you're doing whatever you're doing. If you're writing about your own misery, it's really not that entertaining for the reader. I think there's some of that going on in every generation.
By the way, our friend Yoda-sama wanted to let you know that because of this stream, we got the whole Star Wars set on Amazon. So thank you, Yoda-sama, for, you know,
great
help support.
I hope you enjoy it.
So now, there we go. There's the lights. Folks, let's see what you guys have been asking. So first off, our friend Infinite Wonder has said, I've informed Arch. Okay, what I'm going to do, folks, is I'm going to read the JW Rinzler questions. And then if you'd like to go, I'll address the other non-ones and then close out the show, so you don't have to, you know, sit and wait while I read stuff that isn't related to this stream. Does that work for you?
Yeah, it works for me. My computer has about 22% left, and then I'll have to sign off.
Perfect. So let's see. First off, Dr. Coffinails says, at JW, I love your rise and fall of Star Wars blog. Hope the whole thing will somehow see the light of day.
Well, it'd be nice. I have to have you know, somebody who understands these things and can advise me in terms of what you can and can't do legally, and also have a publisher who's you know, willing to publish it. But I think it's an interesting story. I would like to publish it eventually.
Up next, because that was the thing I had read, you know, the first time I heard about your interview outside of, I think you were on, was it Rebel Force Radio or something along those lines? One of the toy websites I follow had clips and stuff like that. So the blog, that's something I'd like to check out too one day. You know, if you do ever find a way and you would like to promote that, please come here. We'd love to tell everyone about that if that ever sees the light of day.
I'd be happy to come back.
Austin Moore, thank you very much. He says, at JW, what is your favorite piece of Star Wars history? Could be a book, film, toy, etc.
Boy, I don't know. Offhand, it was really cool finding the audio of George Lucas doing the ADR, you know, the looping of Alec Guinness on how to say "The Force will be with you always." Alec Guinness, that's on the enhanced version of the New Hope or Star Wars ebook. You can hear George, you know, it's like, "The Force will be with you always." No, that's not exactly, you know, different readings. It's pretty cool.
Jimmy Mania says, at JW, what about the Disney attack on Star Wars? So I guess what they mean is, I'm trying to how I can phrase it where you could answer the question. People, me included, people just don't like the way Disney's handled Star Wars. They feel attacked. Since you haven't really watched anything post Episode 7, is there anything you can add to that?
You know, I've said on other places. I mean, it's kind of like the James Bond franchise. It's going to go up and down. There'll be good films. There'll be not so good films. I mean, that's the way it's going to go in the future. But it's such a huge franchise. I mean, they're going to keep going.
Deadeye says, what was your reaction when you first saw Disney's Star Wars? How did the writing impact your opinion or critique on it?
You mean The Force Awakens, the first movie?
Yes. Yes.
Well, I mean, I read the script before I saw the movie. Sorry, that comes into NDA stuff.
But hey, okay, I told everyone that would be the case, and I also told you off air I wouldn't try to make it awkward or uncomfortable for you. So we're just going to move on. Yeah. Jeffrey Turner, aka MegaJetty1, says there's a difference between rehash and homage. He wanted, I guess that was Jeffrey Turner chiming in on his opinion, or with his opinion on what I was saying earlier. Horace Scott Johnson gives a thumbs up. Thank you very much. Our friend Joey Bryant says, to our esteemed guest, as an editor to the EU of Star Wars, what was going through your mind when you heard that Kathleen Kennedy disengage the EU and start fresh, but then complain about no resources for the sequels?
Well, I don't know. I don't know about the other part because I wasn't around. I don't know. I think the idea of rebooting the franchise, I guess that's NDA stuff. I don't know. You know, I really don't know. I'm sorry. I don't have a concise answer or an interesting answer. I think I will say there was a lot of good stuff in the EU, and again, if I had been running things, I would have said, let's be more selective about this. You know, maybe we should take some stuff out of canon, but keep other stuff in. That's the way I would have done it.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's realistically what I think people are looking for.
Yeah.
Logan Michael, let's see, that was that one. There was nothing on that one. We have our friend, Canadian Collector wants to know, have you ever met an EU Star Wars author like Timothy Zahn or James Lucino? Also, what were they like if you've met them?
Yeah, I mean, I met Jim Lucino is a friend of mine, actually, and he's fantastic. They've even visited us here in our Northern California hangout, and I met him. And he wrote the visual guide to Indiana Jones, which I edited. And I have to say, it didn't need a lot of editing, and that was a really fun book to work on. That basically just took all the sort of expanded universe Indiana Jones stuff and put it all in context, the comic books and the other novels and the films. That was a lot of fun. And I met, I've met a few. I remember, I've met a few of them. And I remember it was a big thrill to meet Terry Brooks, actually, who wrote the novelization of Episode 1. That was really cool because I loved the Sword of Shannara. I think that was it. Was that right? Somebody correct me. Sword of Shannara. Somebody going to comment on that one? That was a great fantasy book, which I loved as a kid. You know. So anyway, yes, bunch of great, talented people, and of course Jude Watson, who wrote all the Obi-Wan Kenobi Anakin stories. Right, that's Jude Watson. I could look that up. I hope I'm not getting her name right. I edited a number of her books, and she was great.
Our friend Jimmy Mania says, what do you think of the new Lego Star Wars Coyote-Mundi battle pack with 4 Coyote-Mundis to stop the droid attacks on the Wookiees?
Sorry, haven't seen it, but I was really I was pitching a Lego Star Wars publishing merger before it happened, and I was told, nah, it's not a good idea. It won't work. And then DK proposed it, and it was like, then they said, okay, well, if you guys want to do it. And it was a #1 New York Times bestseller for something like more than a year. It's so huge. So I felt quite satisfying.
Our friend Diversity in Comics Bear just wants to say hail to JW Rinzler. So thank you, Diversity in Comics Bear. Andrew Cole asks, where can a sci-fi writer submit work?
Well, you know, if you want to get your stuff published, first of all, you can always self-publish. You can always self-publish. The fan fiction stuff apparently is a good way to start. But if you're actually thinking of traditionally getting published, you have to get an agent. There's almost no publisher that will look at your work unless you have an agent first. And to get an agent, you have to go, there's sort of book fairs or things where they have agents, and agents talk to prospective writers, and then that's one way of getting an agent, interesting them. And you meet them face to face, talk briefly, and see if they're interested in your work.
Barb Rogers, Little Miss Sunburn, just says, welcome to you, JW Rinzler. And then for the final message that we'll read to you on air tonight, it says, hail the High Council. Thank you, Mr. Rinzler. That comes from Raging Rhino all the way from Australia.
Oh, hello in Australia. I enjoyed my time in Sydney.
Is that where episode... wait, we have one more, sorry, that just rolled in from Head Case Laboratory that says, do you believe the Force should have a religious fate to it?
Well, that's a complicated question. What I always liked about the first movie, Star Wars, was that Obi-Wan says, if you cut me down, I'll become more powerful than you can possibly imagine. And then he comes back as a voice in Luke's head, which is basically part of that is that the audience and Luke realize that there's a kind of spiritual afterlife, that even if you're physically no longer exist, you exist in some kind of whatever they call it, afterlife, where you can still communicate with those who are living. That to me seems like a spiritual idea, which you see in certain spiritual practices. I thought that was a big idea to sort of get across to little kids who, the 10-year-olds who were the target audience originally of Star Wars.
So it looks like we've reached the end of the interview. Mr. Rinzler, I'd like to thank you for joining us. Now, one more time to the listeners that have joined in the last couple of minutes, All Up. We can find it on Amazon. I'll share that again. But is there anything else you'd like to say about All Up before we close this stream out?
No, except that, you really have to get it on Amazon right now because of the pandemic and the way distribution's going on. It's pretty much the only place you can get it. But I hope local bookstores will have it eventually. The only other thing I'd add is about a different book, which you may have heard of. I did a book on Howard Kazanjian, who was the producer of Return of the Jedi and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and sort of helped Empire come to the finish line as well, and was a good friend of George's starting at their days at USC. They were students together at USC. So that's a book that's about his career, but touches on Star Wars. And Marsha Lucas did a long-form interview for that book, and she wrote the foreword. So I've been kind of plugging that book, which comes out this spring. And it was a great fun to meet Marsha Lucas and spend an afternoon with her talking about her time and her career, which was kind of like whatever. She was a big part of it for the key few years then.
I definitely want to check that out because she's responsible for editing the Death Star battle, which, in my opinion, is the best part of that movie. So her contribution to Star Wars, I think, over time, she's still there. She's still a part of it. But a lot of other names come to the forefront of why the first film works. But I don't think she can be forgotten. No,
she should not be forgotten. I mean, it's clearly George's creation, and she was said nice things about George, and said that he is really the heart of Star Wars without a doubt. But she did have a contribution, as did other people. So anyway, it was nice to talk with her.
Well, I asked this a question to everybody that appears on one of these streams. So I'm going to ask you as well. What would you like your legacy to be remembered for? How would you like when people say JW Rinzler? How do you want to be remembered?
Well, I hope my kids remember me as a good father. That would be nice. My grandson, he's only 2, but it'd be nice if he has some memories of me, if how long I last. But I guess in terms of an author, I just hope that it's really nice to have people say they enjoyed reading whatever you write, because that's when you're writing, that's what keeps me going sometimes, because some of it can be kind of tedious and you're by yourself a lot of the time, or all the time when you're writing. So it's nice to think of people eventually reading it and enjoying themselves, and eventually you hear a small part of that. So that's really, if there's some joy in that, and afterwards, after I'm gone, there's still some joy, that'd be great. But of course, most authors, their work is pretty much forgotten 10 years or so after they're dead. So I'm not going to worry too much about that.
Well, I'm pretty sure your name will stick around because of the extensive work you've done on Star Wars, and you continue to do it on genre pictures, Alien, Planet of the Apes, all these other things. So your name's attached to films that are in people's hearts. So I wouldn't worry about your 10 years after you pass away, the name won't stick around. It definitely will. So.
All right. Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to think so.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us tonight on the High Council. Folks, I know this was a different approach to the show, but we had a great turnout. Everyone was awesome and respectful. And I don't only want to thank you guys. I want to thank JW Rinzler for joining us. Now, Mr. Rinzler, I am going to let you go. I'm going to read the rest of the super chats, and I'm going to do a couple things before we close out the stream. But I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight. It's been my honor to have you on, and hopefully in the future we could have you back again.
Okay. Yeah, great. It would be fun to come back, and thank you for having me. Thanks for the good questions and the questions from people who were listening. And I wish I could follow all the comments, but my brain would explode. But anyway, yeah, it's all this stuff that's happening online now. I find it fascinating. So yeah, carry on. Thanks again.
We will. Thank you for joining us tonight.
No problem. Thank you.
So, folks, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the rest of the super chats. There were a lot of ones that rolled in, not in regards to the JW Rinzler stuff, but I don't want to leave people hanging. Jesse, now that he's off, I think I'm going to bust out a box of books and sign those while I read super chats. So, folks, I'll be back in a minute. Talk amongst yourself. The topic is, 1930s Stanley haircuts. What did it look like? Oh, so I'm going to stay right here. Is this one that we haven't opened yet? I didn't see the tweet. I saw the title card. Oh, there we go. Oh, I do like the title card. Sorry, Gene. Oh. Crap, I'm going to smush the cherries. I know, this is the weirdest thing for the High Council ever. Almost smushed the cherries. All right, so... all right, folks, we're back. Obviously, I'm going to read the super chats and do stuff. And since I've been on camera in my Randy Orton shirt the entire time, let's crack open another case of these motherfuckers, and we'll sign and read the super chats. So let's see. Spinning my wheel, thank you very much for joining us. I'm glad you guys enjoyed this. I love doing interviews. I have another one I'm working on with an actor who's been in films with Wesley Snipes and had his own TV show in the 90s, and as a very interesting gentleman. So... yes, we're going to continue to make videos and do other stuff and, make art. As you can see, we have fucking cases of these that I'm signing and trying to mail off. Some people have them. Proper Justin has one. So just, be on the lookout for that. But yeah, thank you for Viper Chief for being excited for the next interview. You guys can help. It was Data Racer 117 and Itchy Baka that made this happen. So, thank them. Give them the support, too. The Fandom Menace isn't just a couple of creators you watch on YouTube. It's a network of people that really help make the best stuff possible. So if you guys want, for us to do more stuff, just, keep the community at the forefront and let's, just make all kinds of stuff happen. So I didn't see any drag races tonight. So let's first off, Infinite Wanderer says, I informed Arc Warhammer that you guys wanted him on. I hope you guys have some way of getting in contact with him. I will shoot him a tweet, and if he can't be tweeted that way, we'll find a way to contact him. I would definitely love to talk to him about Warhammer. I have a patron that would like to talk about Warhammer as well. So as we're making this new push for a little more anime and stuff like that on the channel, just to widen, we call ourselves the epitome of pop culture, just to widen that, I would love to have him on. So if you guys. That's one thing you guys don't realize. You can dictate a lot of what we do on the channel. Just, tell me what interests you. If enough people show interest in a topic, I have no issues covering stuff like that. So next week on the High Council, folks, you don't want to miss it because we have Young Ripa. So he will be on. And then 2 weeks after that, we have John Talks. So there's a lot of cool stuff coming to the show right now. Let's see. We have our friend Infinite Wander says, okay, I should mention that Ark is Norwegian and he lives in a different time zone than glorious America. Well, you know what? I have always operated under the guise of what's best for the guest. So when it comes to international guests, if I got to get up at the crack of dawn like I did for the International High Council, I have no trouble with that. I figure they're doing us a solid by appearing on the channel, and unless it's a show like the High Council, we can can play around in their time zone. So that is not going to be an issue. Tom, I dictate. Yes, I do. Let's see. Dr. Coffenhouse, we read his. We read Jimmy's. We read Deadeye's. We read Jeffrey Turner's. We read that one. Logan Michael, Anti-Funko Pops, just sent in a $5 super chat. Thank you, Logan Michael. You are greatly appreciated. By the way, man, what did you think of the Hasbro reveals and how quickly those things sold out? 4 minutes, that's kind of a record. So I'm never going to buy a Deadpool figure because I'm not paying scalper prices for a character that I don't care about as much as other people do. Benito Martinez says, I had to make time for the stream. Benito, I hope you were not let down. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, these Lucasfilm employee streams, they're awesome. I mean, Russell is a great guy. JW Rinzler was an awesome host or guest to have. Definitely want to talk to him more. He's got a ton of stories. That's the thing. You don't want to interview somebody that has one thing to talk about. Clearly, this guy has countless stories, and I had a fun time too. I'm like you guys. I enjoy doing these, and I'm listening as much as I'm asking questions. So that was a lot of fun. They definitely are doing more with the original trilogy. That is definitely their MO because that's where all their money's made. Why would they not make Millennium Falcons based off the original trilogy? Yes, they'll put it in a Galaxy's Edge box, but if you pay close attention to that box, it includes original trilogy, A New Hope sound effects. That Falcon that was gifted to me many, many years ago has A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back sound effects. So obviously they couldn't sell you a Millennium Falcon with the square dish. That's why they also packaged the original one with the ship. Thank you, Chris Cockrum. I'm glad you enjoyed the interview. I had a lot of fun, too. And if you haven't had the opportunity, folks, go back and listen to the interview with Russell Chong, who worked on Batman the Animated Series, all kinds of great shit. Very fortunate for the guests we've had. They've been really excellent guests. So let's see. We also have a Canadian Collector who already had asked his question. Let's see. Andrew Cole, we read his. Jack White asks, Jeff, have you read any of the One Piece volumes you got? And a series recommendation for you is Guest Gundam 00. I have not read any of them. Our friend Wheezy Bird sent in so many that I don't know where to start. Obviously, I started number 1. I'm not stupid. But I'm going to take a picture of your recommendation real quick because I take a picture of all your recommendations. That way I can, work them out. So let's see. Tom says, you go live at 9, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Did you text Tom yet?
Yeah, Tom's in.
Okay, cool. Then I'm going to shoot Tom this link. I'll talk to him for a minute while I'm reading super chats and signing these books and this book. Tom, check your messages on Facebook in just a second, dude. We can continue this conversation here, right now. All right, there you go, Tom. Link is in the chat. And now that you're going to be joining us over on Mindless Entertainment tonight, we'll be having some fun there, too. So let's see. Tomorrow my broken tooth comes out. Oh, well, good luck, Amy, with your dental work. I've been very fortunate that I had a mom who instilled certain values, and I was lucky to have to avoid certain things. But I did crack my tooth once on a fork, and I had to get part of it drilled off, and it was a nightmare. But I wish you nothing but the best. Aaron Jones, I'm signing the replacement comics. I got a how many thousands do we have here? A lot, enough to fill the orders, and now we're sitting on stay flat boxes too. So,
Right.
Yeah, believe me, hooray. So that's what I'm signing right now. These are going out to the backers. Thank you, everyone. You got a perfect bound, and that is the name of the binding material, not my personal opinion. But these are perfect bound graphic novels with higher paper quality than the Marvel equivalent. So I hope you guys enjoy these. These are this is the definition of an independently produced thing. There's no big company. Flubber11 says, Moop. Thank you, Flubber11. Thank you. Appreciate that. But let's see. Yeah, Makita Goot. Hopefully you will like all the added bonus stuff, like the pinup gallery and the cover gallery and some other stuff. And then, you can burn your old one if you want, or you can hold on to it, because I will never go through that company again. So that is the last time you will ever get a book. I don't even think I'm going to produce books that are less than, I don't want to put a page count, but everything's going to be perfect bound moving forward. So I'm going to do graphic novels, not specific comic book issues, because there's a lot of story to tell. And, Woke Busters can't be told in 22 pages. That's all I can say. So let's see. I don't know, Moop, either what it means, but hey. Canadian Collector, let me just make sure I'm caught up on everything. Aaron Jones, I just read yours. Thank you very much. Benito Martinez says, I will get a hold of him if I can. Thank you, Benito, in terms of the Arc Warhammer guy. He's got a platform. Would love to talk to him. Chuck E. Cheese asked, no drag race tonight, Jeff? I muted myself as much as possible. I also wasn't going to go on camera, but JW Rinzler was like, are you not going to show your face? So I was like, I'll show it. So that is why I was on camera, and currently still am on camera, because people were watching. So there we go. But now, Canadian Collector, to answer your question, thank you very much. He says, thoughts on the Shout Factory Friday the 13th set? It looks very cool. If I was a Friday the 13th collector, I would eat that shit up. Personally, I don't like those movies outside of the schlocky cheesiness. Does that mean I hate them? No, I just prefer, like, if I'm going to watch one, I'm going to watch part 6 or part 7. I don't really want to watch parts 1 or 9 or 8. People are like, how do you not want to watch the first one? I want to watch Jason kill things. If I'm going to watch these movies, I want to watch Jason Voorhees, not the little boy popping up in the, the lake at the very end of the film. I want to see him, chopping shit up, people, in tents, in, sleeping bags. I want all that kind of stuff. So. Matt G, thank you very much for your super sticker. I appreciate that. Let's see what it is, actually. It is a super sticker of, let's see. Oh, shit, where'd it go? Salvador says, what does Salvador say? Guest appearance in Woke Busters confirmed. Did I just make that up? Yes, I did. You can be in it. I mean, we'll make a character called Salvador. We have a Louis Tully so far. The best part is, to work on that, I have to watch Ghostbusters a bunch, and that is the greatest thing in the world. So there we go. But Matt G sends in a piece of cake, so thank you very much, Matt. Jesse, you want a piece of cake?
Yum. Cake.
So let's see what else we had here. Sci-Fi for Me TV, definitely want to catch the replay. JW Rinzler was an awesome guest, very nice guy, answered every question. So I couldn't ask for someone nicer on the stream. I guess I have one, though. I have Tom from Midnight's Edge.
Hello, how are you doing?
What up, man?
Oh, hanging in there. Sorry it took me so long. The moment I moved, my dog's like, oh, you're moving. I got to go outside.
Shh. Oh, you're completely fine. I know we're going to be hanging out on Jesse's stream in a few minutes, so it'll be a nice continuation of this.
Yeah, I figured I'd help you get through these super chats, what we got here.
We have Salvador, who says, remember when Hasbro said the large-scale vehicles at $400 price point wouldn't be feasible at retail? Pepperidge Farm remembers. Are you following any of this Comic-Con shit this year? Because it's, broken down without an actual event?
Just that, that they shut it down, that there's some stuff that's going to be released online, and they're going to do, like, some of the virtual con stuff. That's all I know.
That's what we're in the middle of right now, some of the virtual merchandise releases, and it is a dumpster fire because they're like, hey, this is an exclusive at Target, and then it sells out in 4 minutes, and then you can never buy it again.
Yeah, I mean, I know Michael at Retro Blasting was complaining about that too, and I have similar gripes. It's like, first of all, we can blame this whole thing for losing Toys R Us. That's why there's all these exclusives all the time.
Yeah.
And secondly, it's ridiculous because it's just tough to get a hold of these things, or they make it difficult to shit and you spend a buttload of money. Like with the Ghostbusters, they snafu'd that up real bad. But I guess that finally worked its way out. But I guess a lot of people got screwed over on their orders for months on that. Michael was talking about that on one of his streams. And yeah, so like this year, not only that, what do they got to show? I mean, outside of classic stuff, I mean, everything's kind of on hold and hiatus here. I mean, they can't show a lot of the toys of upcoming movies because then they'll be revealing too much. I know some stuff came out of the Kong Godzilla one already that I'm sure Warner Brothers wasn't too happy about, but what are they going to do?
True. The weird part is, like, today, from what I had read, Hasbro pretty much showed what they're putting out at Christmas time too, because of the virus. They're just front loading everything because I don't know if there's going to be distribution closures. I know I dealt with there's a company called Print Ninja that does comics like professionally, but they come out of China, and with all this crap, I didn't want to deal with that right now, So
Yeah.
I don't.
Well, and that's just it. Like most of the toys are produced in China or Korea and stuff like that. So like, how many toys are really? I know we had that show like a couple months ago where we talked about some of the upcoming things, but I mean that was just a few things. I haven't heard of anything upcoming that's gotten my attention yet.
Oh yeah, that was all the Toy Fair blow off. Which
yeah.
hasn't even come out yet.
So that's what I'm saying. Outside of that stuff, what else can they release right now outside of classic, vintage, or like I don't know. I can't. We need an Eddie Murphy Beverly Hills Cop figure. That's the only answer.
Well, we're getting an Ace Ventura doll that looks nothing like Jim Carrey. So I mean,
well, thanks.
Yeah, we're getting all kinds of crap nobody asked for. But speaking of crap nobody asked for, Andrew Clark asks, Fireman calendar with the Thursday night cast, when? Maybe
I like Ace Ventura, but not necessarily the first thing I think about wanting to get a figure of.
No, unless he comes with a rhino.
Well, even that, I don't know. I mean, even as a kid, I wasn't much of a kid when it came out, but I guess I don't see the playability factor and or the collectability factor of him. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I mean, if I'm going to want a Jim Carrey figure, I'm thinking more like The Mask.
Yeah.
Or, you know what I mean? Like something that's got a little bit more pizzazz to it. Because I mean, even Ace Ventura is probably better than Lloyd or whatever from Dumb and Dumber, perhaps. But I would rather have something like the Riddler version of Jim Carrey or the Jim Carrey version of the Riddler or The Mask or something like that instead. That's, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Ace Ventura is kind of like maybe next in line, but I don't know.
I mean, I'm that guy that would buy a Harry and Lloyd 2-pack, but
yeah, I mean, if they got the two of them together, maybe if they looked good, maybe if they came with the Shaggin' Wagon or something, that would be something. But like, yeah, just Ace Ventura, I don't know. They had one a couple of years back, didn't they? Like Necker or something did one.
Yep.
I don't know. It must have sold all right, I guess.
Yeah, they've done two. They did basic Ace Ventura, and then they did the "Put Me In, Coach, I'm Ready to Play." That one where he's got the tutu on.
Oh yeah. I suppose, is this one just a continuation? Is this just Nature Calls, or what are they doing?
Oh no, this is just a high-end doll, but it just looks terrible. Like, it's not NECA doing it; it's something else. So.
Oh, okay. Because those other ones didn't look too bad, but again, I just kind of looked at. I'm like, yeah, I just don't know if I can spend $30-$40 or more on a. I don't see myself. I don't know.
I don't like it enough to care, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, it's like it's not up there in that, yeah, okay. For those who want it, cool. Yeah, that's about it.
So tell me about what's going on. Like, you invited me on a stream last night about the Dynamite stuff. What
man.
What you guys cover?
Well, there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff going on. It started with, I suppose that would be from the Whisper Network or a bunch of people who just didn't like the idea of Dynamite working with Comicsgate people. And I personally think, again, that this is just, my feelings, that they felt like Cecil was kind of an easy target to get to EBS and to kind of get to Dynamite. And there was a bunch of artists and writers and stuff like that were saying they wouldn't work with Dynamite anymore if they kept doing this. And there's people just digging through like Cecil's book trying to find racist stuff or sexist stuff to stand on and go, oh, see, they're a hate group, going off and off and off and off. And the guy who's the head of Dynamite or whatever, he's friends with EBS, and he didn't really want to do this, but from what I know, they may have gotten pressure from, the outside IP holders as well. So like it kind of became a mess. And at first they had everybody who was involved with Comicsgate's campaigns were shut down or under revision or review or whatever. Yeah. And so it was like, then they started popping back up. So Anna's and a few others came back up. Just Cecil's is the only one that's been shut down, I guess. And I mean, it's kind of one of those strange things that I think I don't want to sit there and punish people like Anna and other friends, like, and cancel, like which her book might have already shipped out, so that doesn't matter. But I know a lot of people are talking about canceling this and that and the other, and it's like, I understand, boycotting or not buying like some of the IP and quote unquote professional artists and writers' work, but don't punish people like Anna and stuff like that are in Comicsgate at this point. And I mean, I guess Cecil, he walked away, but I mean, he's a little bit different. Cecil can, EBS can do that. I mean, he can kind of just walk away and do his own thing, because I guess he had some things coming up with them that he decided to walk away from. But the rest of these guys, they've got a lot of stuff going on. And I mean, from Anna's point of view, I think where she's coming from is, she feel like she's got her foot in the door and is Phantom Menace and not Comicsgate. She feels like if she were to relinquish that, then that goes against everything that we as the Phantom Menace have kind of fought for, to kind of get our word, our say in the business, so I think that's kind of where she's coming from on that. But again, I can't speak for her. I know she's going through a lot of shit because of this. That's all I know.
I found out, this isn't leaking private information or anything, but I found out that it was going on from her. So I didn't even know what the deal was until the next, I think it was yesterday, when all the news starts coming out about it. And I'm just like, oh shit. Yeah,
that's what sucks. I mean, I talked to her a little bit too, and she's like, I can't really talk about it right now, kind of thing, and it's just, it's a messy situation for everybody involved, it sounds like. And to me, it just sucks that they decided to bend the knee when, even if let's just say theoretically, it was mainly just because they got some pressure from the rights holders to Red Sonja, let's say, okay? The last few Red Sonja books haven't sold that great. Like, we looked them up. They were selling in that 12 to 13,000 range. So that's all they're selling. That's it. That's all so they're not even making that much money off of. So I don't even understand why they would bend the knee to that. You would think it would make more sense for them to go, oh, well, okay, if you're going to take it away from us and if you don't want to work with us anymore, then I guess bye, Felicia. We've got all these great creators with, their own IPs and stuff that are incoming, and just start working more with Comicsgate, because that's obviously where the money is. Because I feel like, and again, this is just my personal feelings, so don't anybody like go out and say, oh, this is what's going on. It's just my speculation. I feel like a lot of this was retaliation for the Whisper Network getting out there, and then EBS's book breaking 1 million. I think that really rubbed them the wrong way, and they're trying to get to him through Cecil. I really do think that's what it is. I mean, again, that's my own personal opinion.
I'm with you, though. I don't know what's going on. I have no connection to anybody. I'm just, making up all the shit I got to take care of first. But I would look at, like, if I was the Red Sonja rights holder, like you said, bye, Felicia. Were they going to jump to Marvel?
That's just it. I mean, and that's the other thing I was talking about is, I mean, I know a few things I can't really talk about from our side about the whole Conan project, because you know how close Andre is to that. And Marvel scooped up the Conan rights. And again, I can almost guarantee you they would love to get their hands on Red Sonja as well. So who knows how long IDW is even going to be able to hang on to this, because that's the whole thing, is this affects IDW, I guess, because they're their sister company or whatever, or whichever one owns the other. And I mean, IDW is doing okay with the TMNT and the Ghostbusters and Transformers, and I think G.I. Joe they have, and a few other IPs. So I'm sure that's where they're getting pressure, is like that kind of a situation. But again, how well are a lot of these IPs really selling? That's my real question compared to the Comicsgate folks, because we know how well they're doing. So,
well, it wasn't a fatal blow, if you know what I mean, because I know, like, there are other places that you can work with. I mean, the place I work with now is out of Canada. They printed DC books and shit. So, like, Anna and other people, there are going to be outlets for people. I think a company that takes a vested interest in these creators will see, maybe you'll see pushback online, but you'll also see dollars, and that's what business is about.
Right. And I mean, just look at the tweet they put out when they decided to announce this. Last I looked, it hadn't even got 300 likes, and it was getting ratioed to hell with retweets and comments. And then you go look at like Gary's comment and a few others, and including myself, and we had more likes than they did. So I think that kind of speaks to where they're, you know, the customers are sitting on this one. And again, you're just coattailing and giving in and bending the knee to these artists that aren't selling any books, the Gail Simones and the, you know, all these guys. And why should you? What is so special about them, you know? And, you know, we were talking about this, and I think, you know, that umbrella guy brought up the point, like, you know, it's our fault in a way for making these guys think they're rock stars. And then they get a little bit of power and it goes to their head, kind of, in so many words, you know? And it's true, I think they feel like they have the right to do this, and it should be a situation where, like I said, Dynamite should be like, well, good luck finding work elsewhere, because, you know, nothing is selling. And then, like, you know, Comics Division and myself and Tug have been watching a lot of this stuff too, and we looked at how basically the comic industry is costing itself money. And if it wasn't for these, you know, people backing it in the Scholastic program and a few of these other things, I just don't understand this, because it's like they're literally, these people that they're bowing to are costing them money. They're not selling enough books to cover production costs and paying the artists and the writers and all that stuff.
Speaking of customers, I want to give a shout out to our friend Darkside Darren, who has a question about the thing. So Darren, what's going to happen is I'm going to send out an email to the people who backed it with a shirt. I'm going to ask you for your size, and then you're going to get a box. You're going to see other people that got their stuff before you, not because I put them in importance ahead of you, but because anybody that backed the basic book, it gets not slabbed, excuse me, that's the wrong phrase. It gets put in a plastic Mylar bag, it gets put in a special container, gets slapped with a do not bend sticker, and then it gets sent out. That stuff I'm going to send out. Like, if you back the combo, everyone's going to get you'll get a package with your stuff in it. And I think the poster is going to have to come separately, because it's not a giant poster, but the poster tube does not fit in any box. So Darren, I wanted to speak directly to you. First off, thank you. Secondly, that's how the stuff will go. So, but yeah, man, Tom, like I said, it was a little upsetting, because I look at somebody like Anna, who's so talented and so passionate, and she, you know, there's a lot of good people involved in this stuff. Like, I just, when I went back to Ohio the other week, I got my copy of Antonio Bryce's Brand. You know, that and Kanan White had drawn it. And there's a lot of good stuff out there. The funny part is about Comicsgate that the creators elsewhere don't like is, you know, X, Y, and Z, they write Batman, they write Spider-Man. They're not the stars. You have very few and far between. You have people that can sell a book based on a name. That's why Todd McFarlane's getting a documentary and all this stuff. Another one this week. But in the Comicsgate community, there's a lot of people that can sell stuff because of their personality, their persona online. There's no. I'm not surprised that Ethan is as entertaining as he is in person, as well as, you know, he has the skills to back up all the stuff. I mean, I'm not surprised with his success.
Oh no, and he's got the personality to boot, and he's a good salesman. And I mean, he's kind of got just that aura about him that I think he's got a lot of people that gravitate towards him, and most people agree that even if they are, you know, one side of the aisle or the other, being judged and persecuted and basically canceled from your job because of your political standing is bullshit, you know. And I think that's where a lot of people get behind him on that.
He's been just super, super awesome to me. Like, yeah, I'm a little biased, but like, yeah, he is my friend, but like, he has you over to his house, provides, super generous dude. Like, when people say shit about him on the internet, I'm not putting on a face to be polite publicly. I just don't get why people outside of jealousy dislike him. That's all I can say. Because he's been nothing but awesome to me personally. And that's how,
oh yeah.
My mom's always like, treat people the way they treat you. Fine, I'll treat Ethan the way he's treated me. Nothing but nice.
I mean, I've only talked to him a few times, but I mean, I may not agree with everything he agrees with or believes or whatever, but doesn't mean I have a problem with him. He's never done anything to me.
No, he's like I said, he's cool in my book. So he's my friend. And Anna's my friend too, and I want nothing but the best for the people that have always been cool to me. I will say this though, without trying to cause any issues or anything. Like, I saw some of the YouTube channels that were very anti-Comicsgate, and they were instrumental in trying to help Dynamite or get Dynamite away from the Comicsgate stuff. And one of them was a channel that I'm a huge fan of, and I just can't watch anymore. I'm not even going to say his name publicly. I've talked about his videos in the past, but I was like, really, you're that kind of guy? I was disappointed thoroughly. So.
Oh yeah, I was seeping in everywhere. A lot of us kind of seen this happening. I didn't expect them to bend the knee, and I don't even think Screen Rant did, because the one article they did was kind of written from the angle like they thought that they weren't going to bend the knee, but it was like pre-written. It's really weird. Mecca brought it to our attention. But no, I mean, I was dealing with some of it in our Facebook group and stuff like that, where people were running with the narrative that, oh, Cecil's racist and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no. I know Cecil. I know Anna. I may not know Ethan, but like you, I mean, I'm friends with Anna and Cecil too. And I know them much more than I do Ethan, and I'm like, you don't even know who you're talking about. I know this guy. There's no way in hell he's a racist. And if you're going to start running around, yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. It's like,
I have his fucking phone number, dude. When all
right?
this shit went down with my book and everything, who's on the phone with me going, "Hey, we'll help you out. Don't worry." About giving me advice on how to handle shit. Cecil. Cecil is an awesome dude. That's why this kind of stuff pisses me off the most, because it's like, I know these people unlike other people. And when the people in publicly go, oh, they're this, they're that. No, they're fucking not. They're not any of these terrible things. You're just jealous because they're more successful.
Well, not only that, just the shit they were trying to create from the panels of the comic. It's like, I think the problem's more with you than it is with Cecil, because if that's what you see as racist, then I think you're the one with the problem. It's no different than that orc business. I don't know if you remember that. Like, they were trying to say, oh, orcs are racist. And it's like, well, if you think orcs are racist, then I guess you're the problem, because that's how you see black people. Like, you're the issue here, not Cecil, And it's just, I knew it was going to go to this point. It's bullshit.
It is. It's, it's terrible, but it goes to show that what people in this community are doing is working. It's right.
Yeah. How many more? Did you got some more super chats to get through here?
Oh, I do. Sorry. I'm glad you're here.
No. I was just like, yeah, we better get through those here.
Yeah. I'm sitting here signing shit thinking like, oh, Jesse will be on in a couple minutes. No, I have some super chats to read. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. And if you missed the JW Rinzler interview, it went for 2 hours at the beginning of the stream. Excellent time. You can tell me what you thought of my questions. That's cool. But I had a fantastic time talking to the man who has seen the alternate cut of Star Wars that I have put on a pedestal for many years. So that was neat for me to hear. First off, Raging Rhino sends in a generous super chat sticker with a mic drop and a pair. Thank you very much. Fat Steven Seagal beat up Ryan Johnson, changed his name. I love it. Cecil, though, benefited. He's almost at 200K. Well, congratulations to Cecil and his massive success of Cash Grab. Did I grab a copy? I have Cyberfrog. I
got that one. Yeah. Oh, that reminds me. I got to go get Cyberfrog today.
Benito Martinez asks, did you see Overlord DVD's newest video? I have not. I have not watched a lot of YouTube videos in general. I did have a listener make a recommendation, and so I'm going to talk about that in a later video. But no, I have not seen any of I haven't seen any of those people's or anybody's videos, actually. I'm so far removed. I've been taking care of some personal stuff, and then, just trying to get this stuff behind us. There's I want to move through with this project and carry on. Some people want to try to not let me carry on, but I will. So let's see. Dr. Coffin says that, Tom, can you do a George Lucas impression?
That's a crazy rumor.
Mm-hmm.
No, I actually live with Tom. I just hang around. He's got a cool dog.
I don't know. Did you hear some of the George Lucas stories that JW Rinzler was telling us?
I didn't get to hear all of them, but if he's talking shit about me, I will kick his ass.
The funny thing is that he painted George Lucas in a much better... I didn't have like a negative connotation towards George Lucas. I just had an idea of what I thought, certain big creators are like. But then he's talking more about it, and I'm just like, oh, okay, cool. Like, I liked what I was hearing, if that makes sense.
Basically, for every bad story I hear about the guy, I generally hear at least one good story. So it's not like, It's not like he's like some of these other guys who are nightmares in Hollywood, like Chevy Chase and shit and other things like that. And other directors who are just, you know, like Kubrick was and stuff like that with some of their actors and stuff like that. So honestly, he's just quiet for the most part, very self reserved. And I mean, I would believe that if he were raised today, he would probably be on the spectrum at some, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm sure he has probably some kind of like Asperger's or something like that too. Probably that's probably one of the reasons why he's so hard to associate with or talk to in certain situations.
Fat Steven Seagal beat up Ryan Johnson asks, is it true George Lucas wears 6-inch platforms on set?
The rumor is that he does not. He is really short and a little sensitive about that.
So he wouldn't like me. All right.
I heard he's only like 5'4" or something like that.
God, I'm a foot taller than the man that made Star
Maybe
Wars.
a little taller.
Nah. But yeah, I am caught up on the super chats, so that's cool. But it's weird having a high council not having you and Mecca involved. I mean, we've done it for what, 8 months now?
Yeah, and I've been trying to do the get another international one together. Andre's been so busy. But yeah, that's kind of the only thing that's been holding some of it up.
What did he think of the picture?
Oh, he loves it. He changed his icon to it.
Hold on, folks. I'll share it real quick. I got Tom asked me to do a drawing of Andre for Midnight's Edge to put on the on the videos, and so I got that. I got a colorist, and it was pretty cool. So, shit, Pancake, you knocked over my. Oh my
How
God.
did I figure that was shit Pancake?
He will not stay still. He's the cutest cat.
I want to choke him sometimes. Anyway, let's see. Is the screen sharing? Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Excuse me. There we go. There's the Andre one. So there's Andre for Midnight's Edge. That's what he looks like. There we go.
I love it. Now I'm thinking about have you doing one for me and Rob too.
I'll make you the same deal I made for Andre.
No problem.
But yeah, gladly. I'll even show you off air. Oh, okay. I'll text this to you now. You can talk. Don't tell them what it is, but here's what I'm working on. So I told you I got this secret, right?
Yeah.
This project. Look, you have to zoom in to see the detail of it, but you'll get a kick out of it when you look closely what this is.
Oh, I see it. Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Cool,
yeah, the
cool.
secret project is almost.
Is that for him specifically, or is that for something else?
It's for something else.
Gotcha.
So I have a, the second printing of this book coming out with a different cover. So it's there you go. Now you know what it's kind of going to be. So you'll like it though. I'm working with somebody, a very good artist on it too. So it'll be fun. But is there anything else we should talk about before Jess? I know she's going to go live in like 15 minutes, so let me share the link so people can get over there on that one too.
I'd say that might give me enough time to go get some tacos.
Then you go get some tacos. I'm going to share this link real quick, and then I'm going to close this stream out.
And that'll give you time to go to the bathroom.
That's true. I've been sitting here for a couple of hours, but I can't really complain. It's been I've been on a different work schedule lately, like where I get up at 7 a.m, which seems stupidly excessive, but whatever. But I've been making a list of getting shit done, and it's been happening. So I'm just pumped about life right now. I'm not going to let anything change that. But look at folks, there's the stream for Jesse. Thank you, Dr. A. Grant. I appreciate that. You can join us over there on Mindless Entertainment. We're going to be talking about anything you guys want. We'll be on camera. I won't be signing books there because I have to have a conversation. But yeah. We'll be back in like 13 to 20 minutes, and we'll have a hell of a show. Bring your questions, bring your excitement, bring your anger if you want.
I like the randomness of 13 to 20 minutes. I know it's not because that's 9 o'clock your time, but yeah.
And yes, Yoda-sama, the ink has dried on all of these books. I tested it out with the Sharpies that I use and this quality of paper. It dries almost instantly, and I've gone back and checked them, so there we go. You know what I'll do right now? I'll take an old one out for you from underneath this table in the plastic bag, as you can see. and we'll check the ink together.
Let him out.
Mm-hmm. There we go. Don't want any. The funny thing is, the mailers I have don't require that, but I didn't want any scratches on the varnish because I'm, I was once burned by the people responsible. Yeah. See, this has been sitting there for a while, not a smudge on it. So there you go, Yoda-sama. Everything has been taken care of, and moving forward, I'll do all my own shit. I can't trust people to pay them to do stuff, so then I won't have any excuses.
Here,
I
here.
don't have any. I don't need anyone to make excuses for me. All I ask is that people give me a chance to make it right, and we move forward together, and that's what I'm doing right now. And yeah, I'll see you guys on the other projects, the SJW cards, shit like that. Oh, dude, I worked on Crisis on Infinite Genders yesterday. I can't wait for you guys to see it. It's fucking hilarious. So far, I got drawn out. I got Oppression Olympics, The Shill, Infinite Genders, The Virtue Signal, and I'm working on what's going to be the Hall of Social Justice. But the only problem is I can't give them a grand regal building because SJWs seem to be broke. So
It'll be the social Hall of Justice.
it might literally just be a hallway.
Why are we in the hallway of a school?
That's all we can afford. But yeah, Yoda-sama,
Church basement.
Yoda-sama, it's taken a while, but one thing I will say. At the beginning of the year, we wanted to go through Print Ninja, COVID coming from China. Took a minute to find out. TC, best company in the world to work with. I mean, that place called me, made sure everything was taken care of. And now that I basically have worked out the kinks and I'm mailing this shit out to you, when I do stuff like with our second printing, it should be within 60 days of you backing it. You should get your copy because it's a done project. And I'm going to make sure everything is done right because I want to do this more often. I want to be involved in the comic state shit. I don't care if people say enough shit about me already. Most of it's false. So I figure why not get involved with people that I like and, fight the good fight together. So, I'll see you guys out there with more projects in the future. And then, this will be a nice afterthought. All right. So you go get your tacos. I'm going to head out and take care of some shit.
All right.
Live.
Sounds good. I'll see you over there.
Folks, the link is in the chat, and we'll be back. All right. So until next time, folks, on the High Council next week, we have Young Ripa. That'll be an exciting time. 2 weeks after that, we do have our friend John Talks.
So the week after or whatever, yeah.
Yeah. So from all of us here in the Fandom Menace, I'd like to say thank you. And as always, folks, be excellent to each other.